My parents raised my sister like a princess, and me like a servant. For 34 years, I cooked, I cleaned, and I stayed silent, while they told me that some children were simply born to serve. But on the morning of her extravagant wedding, the groom's mother stared hard at my face and made one frantic phone call. The DNA results, she demanded, changed everything. My name is Aaliyah, and I am 34 years old. I am standing in the blistering heat of an industrial kitchen drenched in sweat. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video if you have ever had to break free from a toxic family. Trust me, you will want to hear how I served my revenge colder than the appetizers my sister ruined. The stainless steel counters of the estate kitchen gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, but I barely had time to notice. My chef coat clung to my back, soaked with sweat from the blazing ovens. It was 7 in the morning on the day of my sister Kiara's wedding, and I had been awake for over 24 hours. I was personally prepping a 5-course gourmet meal for 300 elite guests entirely for free. There were no sous chefs to assist me. There was no prep team. It was just me, the hum of the industrial refrigerators, and the overwhelming pressure to make everything perfect for the golden child of the family. I carefully piped a delicate truffle mousse onto the last of 200 miniature savory tarts. My hands cramped from the repetitive motion, but I pushed through the pain. Cooking was my sanctuary. It was the only thing in my life that made sense, the only space where my parents could not easily reach me. Over the years, I had built a quiet but highly successful private catering business from nothing. My clients were some of the wealthiest families in the city who paid premium rates for my services. But to my parents, I was just Aaliyah, the convenient live-in help, who slept in their cramped basement. When Kiara got engaged to Jamal, a man from a deeply respected and wealthy family, my mother, Patricia, did not hire a caterer. She simply handed me a massive menu and told me it was my duty to the family to provide the food. I wiped my brow with the back of my forearm, being careful not to smudge my uniform. Across the kitchen stood my masterpiece. It was a 5-tier wedding cake covered in smooth fondant, delicately decorated with handcrafted sugar flowers that had taken me 3 entire days to sculpt. Every petal was painted by hand. I had poured my heart into it, hoping that maybe just this once, my family would look at my work and see my worth. I wanted them to see that I was capable of creating something beautiful. The heavy, swinging doors of the kitchen violently burst open. The loud crash echoed off the tile walls, making me jump. Kiara stormed into the room. She was wearing a custom silk bridal robe that cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfectly pinned into an elegant blowout, and the heavy scent of expensive floral perfume instantly overpowered the rich aroma of roasted garlic and butter in the kitchen. She did not say good morning. She did not ask how I was doing or thank me for staying up all night. Kiara paced around my prep tables like a health inspector looking for a reason to shut a restaurant down. She ran her finger along the edge of a spotless counter and sighed dramatically. She told me that Jamal's family was accustomed to Michelin-star dining, and that she prayed my little amateur cooking hobby would not embarrass her in front of her new wealthy in-laws. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. My amateur cooking hobby was a fully licensed company that grossed high 6 figures last year. I actually owned the very venue where she was getting married, although she and my parents had absolutely no idea. They thought I was just the hired help who got lucky scoring a cheap discount at a luxury estate. I kept my wealth entirely hidden because I knew exactly what Patricia and Desmond would do if they found out I had money. They would take it just like they took everything else from me. Kiara marched straight past me and stopped in front of the wedding cake. She crossed her arms and stared at it with a look of utter disgust. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her arm. She turned her head slowly and glared at me. She screamed that the fondant on the cake was the wrong shade of ivory. Her voice was shrill and piercing, echoing in the large room. She accused me of doing it on purpose to ruin her aesthetic. She yelled that I was a jealous, bitter woman who could not stand to see her happy. I tried to speak. I tried to calmly explain that the lighting in the kitchen was harsh and fluorescent, and that once the cake was moved into the ballroom under the warm chandelier lights, it would match her color palette perfectly. But Kiara did not want logic or reassurance. She wanted a punching bag. She took a step toward my prep station where I had carefully arranged 3 massive silver trays of the truffle mousse tarts. These were the premium appetizers intended for the VIP cocktail hour. The ingredients alone cost thousands of dollars, not to mention the hours of meticulous labor I had just poured into them. Without breaking eye contact with me, Kiara raised her hand and forcefully shoved the center tray. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the heavy silver platter slide off the edge of the stainless steel counter. It flipped in the air. Hundreds of delicate tarts rained down onto the hard quarry tile floor. The crash was deafening. Fine porcelain serving plates shattered into jagged shards. Mascarpone and truffle oil splattered across my clean chef shoes and the lower half of the cabinets. Thousands of dollars of food lay ruined in a second, turned into a pathetic smear of pastry and cream on the floor. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I looked down at the ruined food and then up at my sister. Kiara smiled a tight, cruel little smirk that she only ever showed when there were no witnesses around. She told me to clean it up before the real guests arrived and reminded me not to embarrass her today. She adjusted her silk robe, looking incredibly satisfied with the destruction she had just caused. The kitchen fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the low hum of the massive refrigerators. I did not yell. I did not cry. I had learned a long time ago that showing emotion to my family was like bleeding in front of a shark. I simply stood there absorbing the sheer cruelty of the moment. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain perfectly neutral. Before I could even reach for a broom, the heavy kitchen doors swung open again. The sharp rhythmic clicking of designer heels signaled her arrival long before she spoke. It was our mother Patricia. She was already dressed in her tailored mother-of-the-bride gown, looking immaculate and imposing. Patricia stopped at the edge of the kitchen. She looked down at the shattered porcelain and the ruined food covering the floor. She did not ask what happened. She did not question why Kiara was standing there looking smug. Patricia slowly lifted her gaze from the mess on the floor and locked eyes with me. She did not scold Kiara for destroying my work. Instead, her eyes narrowed into a cold, hateful glare directed entirely at me. She stepped carefully over a pile of ruined tarts, protecting the hem of her expensive dress. She looked at me with a mixture of contempt and exhaustion. She told me I was always so clumsy. She said it was a miracle I had not burned the entire estate down yet. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to point out that Kiara had intentionally shoved the tray, but the words died in my throat. Patricia held up a single manicured finger, demanding silence. She told me to get on my hands and knees and scrub the floor until it shined. She warned me not to ruin her daughter's big day. She leaned in close enough for me to smell her heavy hairspray, and whispered that today was the closest I would ever get to a wedding of this caliber, considering I still slept in their basement. She turned her back on me, hooked her arm through Kiara's, and gently guided her golden child out of the kitchen, praising her beautiful hair as they walked away. I was left alone, standing over the shattered pieces of my hard work, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. Patricia stepped forward and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the shattered porcelain and ruined pastry on the floor. Her face twisted into a mask of pure disdain. She did not care that her golden child had just intentionally destroyed hours of my painstaking labor. She only cared about the inconvenience of the mess. "Get on your knees and clean it up right now," she snapped. Her voice was sharp and low, carrying that familiar venomous edge I had endured my entire life. "You were always so clumsy, Aaliyah. I honestly do not understand how you managed to function in a professional kitchen without burning the entire building to the ground." She took a step closer, ensuring I could hear every cruel syllable over the hum of the industrial refrigerators. "Do not ruin your sister-us big day," she hissed. "This is a high society event. It is the closest you will ever get to a wedding of this caliber, considering you still sleep in our basement. Act like you belong in the background and do your job." Her words were designed to cut deep, to remind me of my place at the very bottom of the family hierarchy. They had moved me down into that windowless concrete basement when I was just 10 years old, claiming Kiara needed the larger upstairs bedroom for her growing wardrobe. For 24 years, that damp, cold room had been my designated space in the house. They thought keeping me in the dark would break my spirit. They did not realize that the isolation of that basement was exactly what gave me the relentless drive to build my own secret catering empire. I had learned to thrive in the dark. I did not cry. I did not argue. Arguing with Patricia was like pouring gasoline on an open fire. It only gave her the sick satisfaction of knowing she had successfully burned you. Instead, I turned around and calmly reached for the heavy industrial broom, leaning against the stainless steel prep table. I gripped the wooden handle, letting the rough texture ground me in reality. I kept my face entirely blank, a perfect mask of neutrality. I swept the shattered plates and the smeared truffle mousse into a neat pile. The loud scraping sound of broken porcelain against the quarry tile echoed through the massive kitchen. I let them think they had won. I let them believe their cruelty had successfully put me back in my place as the obedient, silent servant. While I performed the physical labor of cleaning, my mind went into absolute overdrive. I was a seasoned professional, and my brain functioned like a high-speed calculator in a crisis. A setback like this would completely crush an amateur chef, but I had built my reputation on navigating culinary disasters with flawless precision. I mentally scanned my inventory in the walk-in refrigerator. I had exactly enough mascarpone heavy cream and truffle oil left in my backup crates to remake the 200 miniature savory tarts. It would require me to work twice as fast. It would take exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes of non-stop prep work to replace what Kiara had destroyed. I would have to skip my only scheduled break and plate the 5-course main dishes simultaneously, but it was mathematically possible. I focused entirely on the numbers, the ingredients, and the timeline. Redirecting my focus to the menu was how I kept my intense rage locked away in a tight little box inside my chest. Seeing my complete lack of an emotional breakdown seemed to irritate Kiara even more. She fed on drama, and my silence starved her. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to see tears rolling down my face. Kiara leaned against the central cooking island, crossing her arms over her expensive silk robe, and looked me up and down with absolute disgust. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Look at you," Kiara sneered, shaking her head. "Are you really going to wear that hideous outfit all day? That oversized white jacket makes you look like a mechanic working in a dirty garage. You could have at least bought a uniform that fits properly instead of looking like a giant marshmallow." Jamal-us family is accustomed to elegance, Aaliyah. If they find out that the frumpy caterer sweating over the stove is actually my sister, I will die of embarrassment. Do not speak to any of his relatives tonight. In fact, do not even leave the kitchen unless you are carrying a tray of food. My chef coat was custom-tailored by one of the premier culinary suppliers in the country, designed for high-heat environments and maximum mobility. But I let her believe her own ignorant insults. It was always easier to let them think they were superior. It gave them a false sense of absolute security. I swept the last of the ruined food into a heavy-duty trash bin and immediately reached for a mop to clean the slippery grease left behind by the butter and oil. Every push of the mop across the floor was a quiet reminder of my own fierce resilience. They thought I was nothing more than a servant because I was willing to do the dirty work. They did not understand that doing the dirty work is exactly how you learn to build a $1 million empire from the ground up. I knew the value of my own labor, even if they never would. The kitchen was finally restored to a spotless state. The rich, earthy scent of the truffle oil still lingered heavily in the air, but the physical evidence of Kiara's tantrum was completely erased. I walked over to the deep industrial sink and turned the faucet handle as far as it would go. I plunged my hands under the scalding hot water, pumping a generous amount of antibacterial soap into my palms. I scrubbed my skin until it turned red, washing away the grease and the lingering traces of the morning humiliation. Patricia and Kiara were still standing near the door, whispering loudly to each other. They were complaining about the seating chart and whining about how exhausting it was to plan a luxury wedding. They fully expected me to scramble in the background like a frightened mouse without a single word of gratitude or respect. I turned off the faucet and reached for a clean, crisp linen towel to dry my hands. The heat from the water radiated through my fingers, keeping me alert and focused. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to start baking the second batch of tart shells. Just as Kiara opened her mouth to hurl yet another vicious insult about my catering equipment, the heavy double doors of the kitchen swung open once again. This time it was not a violent crash. It was a slow, controlled, and deliberate push. The atmosphere in the massive room shifted in a fraction of a second. The heavy, suffocating air created by my mother and sister suddenly seemed to vanish, replaced by an intimidating chill. The rhythmic clicking of very sensible, very expensive heels echoed against the freshly mopped floor. Standing perfectly framed in the doorway was Yvonne Carter. She was the mother of the groom and the undisputed matriarch of a massive generational real estate fortune. Yvonne was a striking, elegant woman in her early 60s. She possessed flawless, deep brown skin, silver hair styled in an immaculate bob, and a posture that commanded immediate submission from anyone in the room. She was wearing a perfectly tailored emerald green suit that likely cost more than the entire catering budget for the evening. Yvonne Carter was not a woman who tolerated fools, and she was famously known in elite circles for her ability to see right through superficial charm. Her sharp, intelligent eyes swept across the kitchen, taking in the entire scene in an instant. She noticed the lingering tension hanging in the air. She noticed Kiara flushed, angry face, and Patricia suddenly rigid, nervous posture. Yvonne stepped fully into the kitchen, her presence alone demanding total silence. She did not look at Patricia. She did not even acknowledge her future daughter-in-law standing by the island. Instead, Yvonne turned her head slowly, and her piercing, calculating gaze landed directly on me. For a fraction of a second, the entire kitchen stood completely still. The wealthy matriarch, who was famously known for her impenetrable composure, suddenly looked as though she had seen a ghost. All the color drained from Yvonne Carter's flawless face. Her posture faltered, and the designer clutch she held in her hands slipped slightly as her grip loosened. Her piercing brown eyes were locked onto my face, scanning every contour, every feature, every angle. She was not looking at my chef coat or the mop bucket behind me. She was looking directly into my eyes, with an intensity that sent a sudden, unexplained shiver down my spine. It was a look of profound shock, mixed with a deep, heartbreaking recognition. I felt a strange, invisible tether pull between us, a sensation I had never experienced with anyone in my entire life. Certainly never with Patricia or Kiara. Patricia noticed the shift immediately. I watched my mother's face contort from her usual arrogant smirk into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She gasped sharply and moved with a speed and desperation I had never witnessed before. Patricia physically lunged forward, inserting her body directly between Yvonne and me, blocking the matriarch's line of sight. Patricia let out a loud, nervous laugh that sounded more like a choke. Her hands fluttered frantically in the air as she tried to usher Yvonne back toward the heavy kitchen doors. "Oh, Yvonne, please do not come in here," Patricia babbled, her voice trembling so violently she could barely string the words together. "The caterers are making such a dreadful mess. You know how disorganized hired help can be. Let us go back to the bridal suite immediately. They are pouring mimosas and Kiara wants your opinion on her jewelry. You really should not be in this dirty kitchen." But Yvonne did not turn around right away. She stood her ground, ignoring Patricia completely. She gently, but firmly, pushed past Patricia's shoulder, stepping closer to where I stood by the deep industrial sink. It was only then that I noticed a warm, damp sensation spreading across the palm of my right hand. During my rapid, silent cleanup, a jagged edge of the shattered porcelain tray must have sliced deep into my skin. I had been so focused on calculating the menu recovery timeline that I completely ignored the pain. A thick drop of dark red blood pooled in my palm and fell silently onto the pristine white tile floor. Yvonne looked down at the blood and then back up at my face. She reached into the pocket of her tailored emerald green suit and pulled out a pristine white linen handkerchief embroidered with a delicate monogram. She did not toss it to me or hand it over dismissively the way wealthy guests usually treat the kitchen staff. Instead, she stepped directly into my personal space, entirely ignoring Patricia Yua's frantic protests. Yvonne gently pressed the folded linen into my bleeding hand. Her fingers brushed against mine, and they were completely cold. "Take this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerators. Her eyes never left mine. She watched intently as my fingers closed around the fabric. She stood there for a long, heavy moment, watching the bright red blood quickly soak into the pure white linen. It was a deeply calculated gaze. She was not just giving me a bandage. She was verifying something. Yvonne finally took a step back. She gave me one last lingering look, a look that conveyed 1,000 unspoken questions before turning on her expensive heel. She allowed Patricia to frantically herd her out of the kitchen. The heavy double doors swung shut behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden quiet. I stood frozen, clutching the blood-soaked linen. My heart was hammering relentlessly against my ribs. I needed to regroup. I needed to bake the second batch of tart shells, but my mind was spinning. To break myself out of the shock, I turned and walked straight toward the massive walk-in refrigerator at the back of the kitchen. I pulled the heavy silver handle and stepped inside. The blast of freezing air hit me instantly, shocking my system back to reality. I closed the thick insulated door behind me, leaning my back against the cold metal. The shelves around me were stacked high with premium cuts of meat-fresh produce and crates of expensive cheeses. I took a deep breath of the frigid air, trying to slow my racing pulse. I pressed Yvonne's handkerchief tighter against my cut. Why had a billionaire real estate mogul looked at a 34-year-old caterer with such absolute devastation? Why had Patricia looked so utterly terrified just because someone made eye contact with me? I gathered the crates of heavy cream and truffle oil I needed, balancing them carefully in my arms. I walked back toward the heavy refrigerator door and pushed it open just a crack. Before I could step out into the main kitchen, a voice stopped me dead in my tracks. Patricia had sneaked back into the kitchen alone. She was pacing furiously back and forth near the prep sinks, unaware that I was standing just a few feet away, concealed by the thick door of the walk-in fridge. She had her cell phone pressed tightly to her ear, and she was whispering with a level of panic that chilled me far deeper than the refrigerated air surrounding me. "Desmond, you need to listen to me right now," Patricia hissed violently into the phone. She saw her. I am telling you, Yvonne saw her face. There was a brief pause as my father responded on the other end, but Patricia quickly cut him off. "I do not care what it takes, Desmond," Patricia whispered, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. She recognized her immediately. I saw it in her eyes. It was like she was looking at a ghost. "We need to get Aaliyah off this property tonight. We have to fire her, frame her, do whatever is necessary to get her out of this state before the reception ends. If Yvonne gets suspicious and runs a DNA test, it is over for us. Do you understand me? If they run a DNA test, we will lose everything. We will go to prison, Desmond." I stopped breathing. The crates of heavy cream in my arms suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I stood completely paralyzed in the freezing dark of the refrigerator. If they run a DNA test. The words echoed in my mind, ringing like a massive, heavy bell. People do not run DNA tests on hired caterers. People do not face federal prisons simply for treating their biological daughter poorly. I played the words over and over in my head, piecing together the terrifying puzzle of my 34 years on this earth. The windowless basement room. The constant reminders that I did not belong. The way my parents looked at Kiara with absolute adoration and looked at me with a mixture of deep resentment and calculated fear. The fact that there were no baby pictures of me in the family albums before the age of 2. They had always told me I was born in a rural hospital whose records had burned down. They had always told me my dark complexion and different features were just a rare genetic throwback. It was all a lie. My entire existence in this family was a massive, meticulously orchestrated lie. Patricia and Desmond were not my parents. Kiara was not my sister. The cruel people who had treated me like a worthless servant for over 3 decades, who had forced me to cook and clean while they lived a life of luxury, had stolen my life. I looked down at the monogrammed linen handkerchief in my hand, now heavily stained with my own blood. Yvonne Carter Aus blood. A slow burning fire ignited deep in my chest. It started as a tiny spark of shock and quickly erupted into a raging inferno of clarity and absolute fury. I did not cry. I did not drop the ingredients. I pushed the refrigerator door open and stepped back into the kitchen. I was no longer the obedient daughter trying to earn scraps of affection. I was a woman who had just realized she held the power to destroy the people who had kept her in chains, and I was going to serve them their destruction on a silver platter. I stepped out of the walk-in refrigerator with my arms full of heavy cream and truffle oil. The freezing air clung to my skin, but the fire burning inside my chest was entirely uncontainable. Patricia had already scurried out of the kitchen, unaware that her panicked phone call to Desmond had just handed me the master key to my own life. I did not confront her right then. I did not scream or throw the expensive ingredients at the wall. A lesser woman might have marched out there and demanded answers, but I was a strategist. I returned to my prep station and went back to work. I baked the tart shells. I whipped the mascarpone. I moved with the precise mechanical efficiency of a woman who had nothing left to lose and absolutely everything to gain. Every time my knife chopped through a bundle of fresh herbs, I pictured the forged adoption papers. Every time I whisked a sauce, I thought about the trust fund they had drained to buy Kiara her luxury cars and designer clothes while I scrubbed their floors. They thought I was their blind, obedient servant. They did not realize they had just trained a survivor. Fast forward to 8 o'clock that evening. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a deep golden glow over the massive estate grounds. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the Grand Conservatory, a stunning glass-enclosed room filled with towering exotic orchids and dripping crystal chandeliers. It was an intimate gathering of exactly 100 VIP guests. The room was packed with Jamal and his affluent family members who flew in from all over the country, along with my fake parents and their closest high society friends. Waiters in crisp black uniforms glided through the room carrying plates of seared scallops and filet mignon. I stood in the shadows near the heavy wooden service doors holding a silver tray of expensive champagne flutes. I was dressed in my pristine white chef coat, blending perfectly into the background just as Patricia had ordered me to do. My hands were steady, but my eyes were constantly scanning the room. I was watching them. I watched Patricia and Kiara standing near the string quartet. They were huddled together, their heads close, their faces tense as they whispered frantically. They kept casting nervous glances in my direction, and then looking over at Yvonne Carter, who was seated at the head table, engaged in polite conversation with an ambassador. I knew exactly what my fake mother and fake sister were doing. They were strategizing a way to eliminate me. They had realized that simply hiding me in the kitchen was no longer enough. I was a massive liability breathing the same air as Yvonne Carter. They needed to manufacture a reason to completely remove me from the estate before Yvonne could ask any more questions or demand a DNA test. They needed a public spectacle. They needed a crime that would justify my immediate removal. Kiara looked radiant to anyone who did not know the monster hiding underneath her skin. She was wearing a stunning backless emerald silk gown that clung to her perfectly. Around her left wrist sparkled a massive $40,000 diamond tennis bracelet. It was a welcoming gift from Jamal and his family, a token of affection for a woman she was about to marry into using money stolen entirely from my trust fund. Jamal stood beside her, looking handsome in a tailored charcoal suit, offering her a warm, affectionate smile. Jamal was a good man. He was a highly successful architect who came from a lineage of proud, educated African-American professionals. He had been entirely blinded by Kiara and her carefully constructed innocent persona. He truly believed she was a sweet, charitable woman. He had absolutely no idea he was marrying into a family of ruthless thieves and kidnappers. The evening progressed smoothly until the main dinner plates were cleared away by my staff. It was time for the champagne toast. The room grew quiet as people prepared for speeches. I walked through the tables, moving silently, offering fresh glasses of vintage champagne to the guests. I finally approached the head table where Kiara and Jamal were seated alongside Patricia and Desmond. As I extended my heavy silver tray toward Kiara, she reached out her hand. But instead of taking the delicate crystal flute, she intentionally slapped the back of her hand against the side of the glass. The heavy crystal tipped over, spilling pale gold champagne entirely across the pristine white linen tablecloth before rolling off the edge and shattering onto the solid marble floor. Before I could even reach for a cloth towel, Kiara let out a piercing, dramatic shriek. The sound was so jarring that it instantly silenced the entire conservatory. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. 100 conversations died in an instant. Every single head in the room snapped toward the head table. Kiara jumped up from her chair, knocking it backward. She clutched her bare left wrist, holding her arm up for everyone to see. Her eyes were wide with manufactured panic, and perfect crocodile tears began to well in her eyes. "My bracelet," she screamed, her voice echoing off the tall glass walls of the conservatory. "My diamond tennis bracelet is gone. It was just on my wrist 2 minutes ago." Jamal immediately stood up, his face tight with concern. He reached for her hand, trying to calm her down, gently rubbing her shoulder. "Kiara, honey, please do not panic. It probably just unclasped and slipped off," he said, his deep voice carrying a calming tone. "Let us just look around the table. It has to be on the floor." But Kiara forcefully pulled her arm away from him. She did not look at the floor. She did not ask the guests to check near their feet. She turned slowly and pointed her perfectly manicured finger directly at me. I stood perfectly still, holding the empty silver tray, keeping my face a mask of stone-cold indifference. "It did not slip off," Kiara declared, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch, so every single person in the room could hear her clearly. "She took it. The caterer took it." A collective loud gasp rippled through the elegant room. I felt the heavy, crushing weight of 100 pairs of eyes suddenly bore into me. Whispered murmurs broke out among Jamal and his wealthy relatives. At the end of the table, Yvonne Carter stopped sipping her sparkling water and narrowed her sharp brown eyes, watching the scene unfold with intense calculation. Patricia practically leaped out of her chair, clutching her pearl necklace in fake absolute horror. "Kiara, what on earth are you saying?" Patricia gasped loudly, playing the role of the shocked, embarrassed mother flawlessly. "I am saying that I felt her brush against my arm right before the champagne glass fell," Kiara shouted, stepping aggressively closer to me. "She unclasped it when I was distracted. Look at her standing there. She has been staring at my jewelry all night long. She is just a jealous, broke caterer who probably needs the money to fund her pathetic little business. She stole my $40,000 bracelet, and it is probably sitting in her apron right now." The room erupted into shocked, hostile whispers. I did not blink. I did not cower. I looked directly into Kiara and saw the absolute gleeful malice shining in her eyes. This was their brilliant master plan. Frame the hired help for grand larceny, call the police, and have me escorted off the property in handcuffs before the night was over. It was a desperate, reckless, and incredibly stupid move, but it was exactly the kind of arrogant tactic I expected from people who had gotten away with stealing a child. Jamal looked at me and then back at his bride. "Kiara, you cannot just accuse the catering staff of stealing a $40,000 piece of jewelry." He started, his voice firm, but deeply conflicted. "We need to be reasonable and search the area first." Before Jamal could finish his sentence, Desmond stepped forward from the adjacent table, pushing his way past a waiter. My fake father puffed out his chest, trying to look authoritative and deeply offended on behalf of his daughter. He pointed a thick, heavy finger straight at my face. "We do not need to be reasonable when a major felony has just been committed," Desmond boomed, his voice filled with righteous indignation. "This woman is a thief. I want the venue manager out here right now. I want the police called immediately." And until the authorities arrive, I demand that she be taken into the coat room and strip-searched. She is not leaving this building with my daughter and her diamonds. I stood my ground under the burning glare of the crystal chandeliers. To the untrained eye, I was just a trapped, terrified servant caught red-handed in a room full of powerful millionaires. I was completely surrounded by people who could ruin my catering business with a single phone call. But they did not know the truth. They did not know that I was not just a caterer. They did not know that the venue manager, Desmond, was currently screaming for actually answered directly to me. I let the heavy silence stretch out for a few seconds, allowing Desmond and Kiara to fully commit to their aggressive public performance. I wanted every single guest in that room to witness their sheer cruelty, so that when the hammer finally fell, there would be absolutely no sympathy left for them. The Carter family sat in stunned silence. These were people of immense wealth and high social standing, people who abhorred public scenes and tacky dramatic displays. Jamal, looking deeply uncomfortable but trying to maintain control of the escalating situation, raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Desmond, let us all take a breath," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a tone of reason that directly contrasted with my family's hysteria. "We are not strip-searching anyone. This is a misunderstanding. The bracelet likely just unclasped, fell, and was kicked under a table. Aaliyah has been working hard, serving everyone all evening. We just need to calmly look for it." Patricia could not allow that. She could not let Jamal defuse the situation because her entire goal was to have me physically removed from the property before Yvonne Carter could look at my face again. Patricia placed her hand over her heart and took a dramatic step toward Jamal, us parents. "I am so incredibly sorry that you have to witness this," Yvonne Patricia cried, her voice dripping with perfectly rehearsed shame. She looked around at the Carter relatives, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken mother to perfection. We tried our absolute best to keep this private to avoid embarrassing the family. But Aaliyah has struggled with severe kleptomania since she was a teenager. We thought giving her the catering job would keep her supervised and give her a sense of purpose, but clearly we were horribly wrong. Please forgive us for her behavior. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the elegant conservatory. Guests leaned in, whispering to one another behind their crystal champagne glasses. Patricia had just publicly branded me a lifelong thief to 100 of the most influential people in the city. She thought she had cornered me. She thought I would crumble under the weight of such a humiliating public accusation, just like I did when I was a helpless child. At the far end of the head table, Yvonne Carter did not gasp. She did not clutch her pearls. She simply leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers, her sharp eyes darting between Patricia's fake tears and my completely stoic face. She was watching a chess match, and she knew Patricia had just made a fatal move. Desmond felt emboldened by his wife's performance. He took an aggressive step toward me, his face turning an angry shade of red. He pointed a thick, heavy finger directly at my chest. "You heard her," Desmond barked, his voice echoing loudly off the glass walls. "Get to the coat room right now, Aaliyah. Empty your pockets and take off that ridiculous chef jacket before I drag you in there myself and have the police do it." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the man who had tormented me and belittled my existence for decades. I stood perfectly still, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out for a few agonizing seconds. Then I slowly slid my right hand into the deep front pocket of my apron. Kiara let out a breathless, triumphant little gasp. She clearly expected me to pull out her sparkling diamond bracelet, fall to my knees, and beg for mercy in front of her new wealthy family. Patricia let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief, turning to smile apologetically at the guests, convinced she had finally broken my spirit and secured my eviction from the estate. But instead of a $40,000 piece of jewelry, I pulled out a sleek black tablet. It was the venue management device I used to control everything from the lighting schedules to the payroll. I tapped the screen, entering my secure passcode, and opened the master legal file for the estate. The screen illuminated my face in the dim, romantic lighting of the conservatory. I did not hand the tablet to my father. I knew he was too ignorant to understand the legal jargon. I did not hand it to Kiara because she would probably just throw it across the room in a fit of rage. I walked carefully around the shattered glass and the spilled champagne on the floor, and I extended the tablet directly toward Jamal. Jamal frowned, completely bewildered by the gesture. He hesitated for a moment, looking from the tablet to my face, searching for some kind of explanation. "Take it," I instructed him calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "Read the highlighted section at the top of the document. You are a highly successful commercial architect, Jamal. You know exactly how to read property contracts and operating agreements." Jamal slowly reached out and took the tablet from my hands. The room was so incredibly quiet that the gentle hum of the climate control system sounded like a jet engine. Every eye in the conservatory was fixed on Jamal. His eyes darted across the digital pages, taking in the state seals, the tax identification numbers, and the undeniable legal terminology. As an architect who dealt with commercial developers every single day, he recognized an ironclad legal document when he saw one. He scrolled down to the final page, his eyes locking onto the signature line. I watched the confusion on his face slowly transform into absolute shock. His brow furrowed, his eyes widened, and he swallowed hard. He looked up at me in disbelief, looked back down at the glowing screen to verify what he was reading, and then turned his head to look at his bride. "Jamal, what is it?" Kiara demanded, her voice losing its manufactured panic and taking on a sharp edge of genuine annoyance. "Stop looking at her stupid catering schedule and call the police. This is not a catering schedule," Jamal said. His voice was thick with shock, projecting loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. He held the tablet up slightly, his hands trembling just a fraction. "This is the master lease and operating agreement for this entire estate. It outlines the ownership of the venue, the grounds, and the primary hospitality contracts." Patricia crossed her arms, looking impatient and utterly confused. "So what? Why does the hired help have a copy of the venue us lease?" Jamal looked directly at Patricia, his expression hardening into something resembling deep disgust. "Because she is not the hired help," Jamal stated flatly. He turned the tablet around so the head table could see the digital seals and the notarized signatures at the bottom of the screen. "The sole proprietor of the LLC that owns the exclusive management rights and the master lease to this entire property is Aaliyah. She owns this venue." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, deafening vacuum of sound. Desmond froze mid-step, his arms still partially raised to point at me. Patricia's jaw actually dropped open, her perfectly rehearsed facade shattering into a million pieces in real time. Kiara let out a short, high-pitched laugh of utter confusion. "What are you talking about?" Kiara shrieked, grabbing Jamal's arm and trying to pull the tablet away from him. "Jamal, you are reading it wrong. That is impossible. She must have forged it. She is lying. She makes cheap food for a living. She lives in our basement. There is no way she owns a multi-million-dollar estate." I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and my fake family. The power dynamic in the room flipped so violently, I could almost feel the change in the air pressure. I was no longer the quiet servant hiding in the shadows. I was the woman holding the keys to their entire social standing. "I lived in your basement until I was 18. I corrected Kiara, my voice ringing out clear and powerful across the entire conservatory. "Then I moved out, built a business from the ground up, and eventually bought out the management company that controls this exact estate. I operated under a blind LLC specifically so people like you could never try to claim credit for my hard work. Every crystal chandelier you praised, every floral arrangement you boasted about to your friends, and every bite of food you have eaten tonight was paid for, designed, and approved by me. I did not give you a discount on this venue out of the kindness of my heart, and I certainly did not do it because I owe this family anything. I allowed you to book it because my staff needed the large-scale event practice, and because I wanted to oversee every single detail myself. You are a guest in my house. I turned my gaze slowly from Kiara's pale, horrified face to Desmond. He was staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. All the bluster, all the arrogant authority he had projected just a minute ago had completely evaporated. He looked small, foolish, and entirely out of his depth. I locked eyes with the man who had ordered me to be strip-searched, and I delivered the final blow. So, Desmond, I stated clearly, letting every single word land with the devastating weight of a sledgehammer. If you call the police to strip-search the property owner without a warrant, I will legally revoke the venue contract right now. Everyone in this room will have exactly 15 minutes to vacate my premises, and there will be absolutely no wedding tomorrow. The silence in the conservatory was so profound that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigeration units humming 2 rooms away. My father stood frozen with his arms still suspended in the air. The fierce, commanding authority he had tried to wield against me just moments ago completely evaporated. He slowly lowered his arm, looking around the room, as if hoping someone would tell him this was all a terrible joke. But Jamal was still holding the tablet, displaying the undeniable legal proof that the daughter they had treated like a worthless maid was actually a self-made millionaire and the owner of the very ground they stood on. Now that we have clearly established who controls this property and who has the authority to evict whom, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, let us address the matter of the missing $40,000 diamond bracelet. Since you were so eager to involve the authorities, Desmond, I think it is only fair we conduct a thorough search before I make the call myself. Patricia immediately began to backpedal, her face flushing a deep mottled shade of red. Aaliyah, please let us not overreact. She stammered, her voice tight and breathy. Emotions are just running very high tonight. Weddings are stressful. I'm sure the bracelet simply fell off, and we will find it in the morning when the cleaning crew comes through. There is absolutely no need to escalate this any further. We are family after all. The sheer audacity of her invoking the word family almost made me laugh. I turned my attention away from my panicking parents and locked eyes with my sister. Kiara had gone completely pale. She was clutching her small, heavily beaded designer purse against her chest, as if it were a shield. I am not escalating anything, Patricia, I replied smoothly. I am simply following protocol. Kiara, you were absolutely certain you felt me brush against you and unfasten your jewelry. You were certain I stole it to fund my business. So before I pick up my phone and dial for the police, I want you to open your purse and empty it right here on the table. Kiara shook her head rapidly, taking a step backward. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route. No, she snapped, her voice trembling with barely suppressed panic. I am not doing that. This is ridiculous. You are just trying to humiliate me in front of my guests because you are jealous. Jamal, tell her to stop. She reached out to grab Jamal by the arm, but he took a deliberate step away from her. The look on his face was one of profound, devastating disappointment. He was a smart man, and the pieces were rapidly falling into place right in front of him. He looked at the way she was desperately clutching the bag, and then he looked at me, standing completely unfazed. Empty the bag, Kiara, Jamal said. His voice was no longer warm or comforting. It was cold and demanding. Jamal, you cannot seriously believe her. Kiara whined, her voice pitching higher in desperation. She is lying. She manipulated those property documents. If you do not have the bracelet, then emptying the bag will prove she is lying. Jamal countered his tone, leaving absolutely no room for argument. Do it right now. The entire Carter family watched in grim silence. Yvonne Carter sat perfectly still at the end of the table, her sharp eyes missing absolutely nothing. Kiara looked at her parents for help, but Desmond and Patricia were completely paralyzed, terrified of provoking me into canceling the venue contract. Realizing she was entirely cornered, Kiara began to physically shake. Her hands trembled violently as she slowly unclasped the gold latch of her designer clutch. Turn it upside down, I instructed, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Kiara squeezed her eyes shut and tipped the small bag over the pristine white tablecloth. Her expensive lipstick, a compact mirror, and a hotel room key clattered onto the table. And right behind them, tumbling out with a heavy, unmistakable sound, was the brilliant, sparkling $40,000 diamond tennis bracelet. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed immediately by harsh, furious whispers from the Carter relatives. Jamal stared at the diamonds resting harmlessly on the table, and then slowly raised his eyes to stare at his bride. The betrayal written across his face was absolute. He realized in that exact moment that the woman he was about to marry had just attempted to maliciously frame a member of her own family for a major felony simply out of spite. "Oh my goodness!" Patricia shrieked loudly, rushing forward and grabbing the bracelet with shaking hands. It must have just slipped right off her wrist and fallen directly into her open purse. What an unbelievable coincidence. "Kiara, you silly girl, you need to be more careful. Look at all this unnecessary drama over a simple misunderstanding. Nobody bought it." The excuse was so pathetic and transparent that several of Jamal's relatives actually rolled their eyes. I looked directly at Jamal, witnessing the severe fracture in his trust. He did not say a word to Kiara. He simply turned around and walked out of the conservatory, needing air. Kiara burst into genuine tears of humiliation and chased after him, leaving my parents standing there in the wreckage of their own failed scheme. I reached out and gently took my tablet off the table. "I will see you all bright and early tomorrow for the wedding," I said, offering Patricia a cold, empty smile. "Try to keep a closer eye on your jewelry." I turned and walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the heavy weight of their absolute defeat pressing against my back. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Hours later, the estate was completely silent. The rehearsal dinner had concluded in an atmosphere of intense awkwardness, and the guests had all retreated to their respective hotel suites. It was past 1 in the morning. I was standing alone in the large commercial pantry adjacent to the main kitchen. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the metal storage racks. I was methodically polishing the silver serving utensils with a microfiber cloth, finding comfort in the repetitive motion. My mind was racing, replaying the look of sheer terror on Patricia's face when Yvonne Carter had stepped into the kitchen earlier that morning. I knew my parents were hiding something massive, but I still did not have the missing puzzle piece. The sound of soft, deliberate footsteps echoed in the hallway. I paused my polishing as the heavy wooden door to the pantry slowly swung open. Yvonne Carter stepped into the dimly lit room. She had changed out of her emerald suit and was wearing a luxurious silk robe, her silver hair still perfectly styled. She stepped fully into the pantry, closed the heavy door behind her, and I heard the distinct metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. She had locked us inside. I set the silverware down on the stainless steel counter, instantly on high alert. I did not know what Jamal's mother was capable of or whose side she was truly on. She walked toward me, moving with a quiet, commanding grace. She stopped on the opposite side of the prep counter. She did not mention the dramatic scene in the conservatory. She did not ask about my catering business or how I managed to buy the estate. She was laser-focused on something far more important. Yvonne reached into the deep pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She set it down on the cold stainless steel surface and slowly slid it across the counter until it rested right in front of my hands. I looked down at the unmarked envelope and then back up at her face. Her piercing brown eyes were shining with unshed tears, an emotion I had never expected to see from the notoriously stoic matriarch. "When I saw you in the kitchen this morning, I thought my mind was playing a cruel trick on me." Yvonne spoke, her voice a low, steady whisper that carried an immense weight. "You have her eyes. You have her exact jawline. But when your mother panicked and tried to hide you, it confirmed my darkest suspicion." She took a slow, shuddering breath and pointed a trembling finger at the envelope. "I am a very wealthy woman." Yvonne continued, her voice gaining strength. I have resources that most people do not even know exist. I have a private medical laboratory on retainer for my corporate employees. After I left the kitchen, I immediately sent a courier to my lead geneticist. She paused, looking deeply into my eyes. I expedited the lab results using the blood from your handkerchief, Yvonne whispered, the tears finally spilling over her lashes and tracking down her elegant face. You aren't Patricia us daughter. You are my late sister, us child. The air in the pantry suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stared at the heavy manila envelope resting on the cold stainless steel counter. My mind struggled to process the words Yvonne had just spoken. My late sister's child. I reached out and my fingers trembled as I touched the thick paper. I pulled the flap open and slid the contents out under the dim pantry lights. The first document was the official DNA test result from the private medical laboratory. The stark black text printed on the crisp white paper was absolute and undeniable. It confirmed a 99.9% genetic match between Yvonne Carter and myself. I was her biological niece. But the DNA test was only the first page. Beneath it lay a thick stack of documents that Yvonne's private investigators had rapidly pulled from sealed court records, birth registries, and offshore banking files. Yvonne stepped closer, her voice thick with decades of suppressed grief. My sister died in a horrific car crash 32 years ago. Yvonne explained, her gaze fixed on the papers in my hand. You were only 2 years old at the time. You were in the back seat, but you miraculously survived with barely a scratch. Our family was entirely shattered by the sudden loss. In the absolute chaos of the funeral and the estate settlement, you simply vanished. The local authorities told us you had been taken by a distant relative of your father who lived out of state. We spent millions of dollars searching for you, hiring the best investigators in the country, but the trail went completely cold. They covered their tracks perfectly. I looked down at the next document in the stack. It was a faded photocopy of an adoption certificate dated exactly 32 years ago. The signatures at the bottom belonged to Patricia and Desmond. I looked up at Yvonne, my voice barely a whisper, but echoing loudly in the quiet room. How did they get me? Who were they to my mother? Patricia was not just a random stranger, Yvonne said, her tone turning sharp with intense disgust. She was my sister's live-in maid. She knew the layout of the house, she knew the schedules, and most importantly, she knew about the trust fund. My sister had set up a massive irrevocable trust in your name. It was designed to pay out a generous monthly stipend for your care, your education, and your future, until you turned 35, at which point you would inherit the entire multi-million-dollar principal. The horrific truth began to assemble itself in my mind like pieces of a waking nightmare. Patricia had forged the adoption papers. She had legally kidnapped me as a grieving toddler, manipulated the chaotic system, and vanished into a different state. She did not take me because she wanted a child. She did not take me out of love or maternal instinct. She took me because I was a walking, breathing lottery ticket. I flipped to the next page in the heavy file. It was a comprehensive financial ledger documenting 32 years of bank transfers. Every single month for over 3 decades, a massive check from my trust fund had been deposited directly into an account controlled entirely by Patricia and Desmond. I stared at the numbers printed on the page, the hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned away year after year. The betrayal hit me with the physical force of a freight train. I felt violently sick to my stomach as the memories of my entire childhood rushed back into my brain, suddenly painted in a grotesque and horrifying new light. Everything my fake sister Kiara possessed had been bought with my blood money. Her exclusive private school education, the designer clothes that spilled out of her massive walk-in closet, the brand new luxury car she received for her 16th birthday. Even this extravagant wedding, the imported orchids in the conservatory, the thousands of dollars of premium catering ingredients I had been forced to prepare for free. All of it was funded by the stolen inheritance meant for me. While they drained millions of dollars from my name to live like high society royalty, They had banished me to a damp, windowless concrete basement. They had forced me to wear Kiara's discarded hand-me-downs. They had made me scrub their floors, wash their laundry, and cook their meals. They constantly told me I was a burden. They told me I was lucky they had taken me in when nobody else wanted me. They used psychological abuse to keep my self-esteem completely crushed, knowing that if I ever gained the confidence to ask questions, their entire criminal empire would collapse. They had literally turned the rightful millionaire owner of their entire lifestyle into their indentured servant. The sheer magnitude of their evil was incomprehensible. They had not only stolen my money, they had stolen my actual family. They had stolen the memory of my real mother. They had forced Yvonne to spend 32 years mourning a niece who was alive and scrubbing toilets just a few states away. They watched me struggle to build my private catering business from absolute nothing. They watched me work 20-hour days burning my hands on hot stoves, saving pennies to buy my first set of professional knives, all while they sat comfortably on the millions they had stolen from an orphaned child. A deafening ringing filled my ears. The stoic composure I had maintained all day, the quiet resilience I had relied on to survive my childhood finally shattered. This was no longer just a toxic family dispute over a piece of missing jewelry. This was a massive federal crime. This was kidnapping, systemic fraud, and grand larceny spanning 3 decades. My hands began to shake violently, not from fear, but from a raging, explosive anger that demanded immediate and absolute destruction. They were going to pay for every single second of my stolen life. I did not say another word to Yvonne. I dropped the heavy manila envelope onto the stainless steel counter. I shoved my hand deep into my chef apron and pulled out my cell phone. The bright screen illuminated the dark pantry. My fingers flew across the glass, bringing up the keypad. I was going to call the police right now. I was going to have dozens of squad cars swarm this luxury estate. I wanted to see Patricia and Desmond dragged out of their expensive hotel suites in handcuffs tonight. I wanted Kiara to wake up tomorrow morning with no family, no stolen money, and absolutely no wedding. I dialed the 9. I dialed the 1. I moved my thumb to press the final digit, my heart pounding fiercely in my chest, fully prepared to burn their entire fake world to the ground right then and there. But before my finger could make contact with the screen, Yvonne suddenly lunged forward. She reached out and slammed her hand firmly over my phone, covering the display and physically stopping me from completing the call. Yvonne's hand was freezing against my skin, but her grip was like a steel vice. She pressed down on my phone screen with absolute authority, forcing me to lower the device. I stared at her, my chest heaving with unspent adrenaline. I wanted justice right then and there. I wanted the flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers to light up the front lawn of the estate. But Yvonne shook her head slowly, her eyes locked onto mine with a chilling calm that immediately commanded my attention. "Do not make this mistake, Aaliyah," she whispered fiercely. "I understand your rage. I have been mourning you for 32 years, and I want to tear them apart with my bare hands. But you must think like a strategist, not like a victim. If you dial that number right now, you will give them exactly what they need. You will give them time." I pulled my hand back, clutching the phone tightly against my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking with raw emotion. "You have the DNA test. You have the forged adoption papers and the financial ledgers. We have all the proof we need to put them behind bars for the rest of their miserable lives." Yvonne stepped back, leaning against the heavy metal shelving of the pantry. "It is a 32-year-old paper trail," she explained, her tone steady and purely analytical. "The justice system is incredibly slow and highly susceptible to manipulation. If the police arrive tonight, Patricia and Desmond will play the role of the shocked innocent parents. They will claim it was a massive bureaucratic mix-up. They will swear they used a private adoption agency that misled them, and that they had absolutely no idea who you truly were." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the financial documents resting on the counter. "And while the police are busy trying to untangle decades of forged documents, Patricia and Desmond will still have access to your trust fund. They will immediately hire a fleet of the most ruthless, high-priced defense lawyers in the country, using your own stolen money to pay their legal fees. They could easily tie this up in litigation for years, draining the accounts completely dry before a judge ever sees the inside of a courtroom. We cannot give them the opportunity to build a defense. The cold, hard logic of her words washed over me, extinguishing the blind panic and replacing it with a sharp, calculating clarity. She was absolutely right. My fake parents were seasoned manipulators who had successfully lived a double life for decades. They knew how to lie under pressure. Giving them a chance to spin a narrative would be a fatal error. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, determined whisper. "How do we stop them from using my money to walk away? We need to catch them committing a fresh, undeniable felony on camera today," Yvonne said, her eyes narrowing with a dangerous, predatory gleam. "After the humiliation with the bracelet and your revelation about owning this venue, they are completely backed into a corner. They know I recognized you in the kitchen this morning. They are absolutely terrified that I will run a DNA test, not knowing I already have. Panicked people make sloppy, desperate mistakes. We just need to give them enough rope to hang themselves." I looked down at the stainless steel counter processing the plan. It required an immense amount of discipline. It required me to walk back out there and pretend I did not know that the people giving me orders had stolen my entire existence. It meant serving them their gourmet meals, pouring their expensive wine, and watching Kiara flaunt her stolen wealth for just a little while longer. I agreed to the plan. I told Yvonne, my voice hardening into a vow. I will play the obedient, silent servant for the rest of the wedding day. I will let them think they still have the upper hand. I will let them believe their little threats still work on me. They will be so blinded by their own arrogance that they will not even see the trap until it snaps shut on their necks. Yvonne nodded, a small, proud smile touching the corners of her mouth. "You have my sister's fire," she whispered softly. "Get some rest, Aaliyah. Tomorrow we end this." The sun rose a few hours later, casting a brilliant, bright light over the sprawling, manicured lawns of the estate. The wedding day had officially begun, and the property was buzzing with chaotic energy. Florists were frantically arranging towering displays of white roses in the ballroom, while the string quartet tuned their instruments in the courtyard. I stood in the center of the industrial kitchen, buttoning up my crisp white chef coat. It no longer felt like a uniform of servitude. It felt like a suit of armor. I moved through the morning prep with mechanical efficiency, my mind operating on two entirely different frequencies. On the surface, I was the focused venue owner and executive chef managing a massive staff of waiters and sous chefs to ensure a flawless 5-course service. But beneath the surface, I was a hunter quietly observing my prey. I saw Patricia and Desmond briefly in the main dining hall. They looked exhausted, their eyes darting around the room with paranoid intensity. They were clearly rattled by my revelation the night before, but they were still clinging to the illusion of control. When Patricia demanded a fresh pot of coffee be sent to the bridal suite, I did not argue. I did not glare at her. I simply nodded politely and said, "Right away, ma'am." The slight look of relief that washed over her face was almost comical. She truly believed that because I had not kicked them out of the venue, I had decided to keep the peace and accept my role. She thought the storm had passed. But Kiara was a completely different story. The public humiliation with the diamond bracelet had fractured Kiara's carefully constructed facade. She could not handle the fact that her new husband, Jamal, had looked at her with such profound disgust. She needed a scapegoat, and I was her favorite target. Midway through the afternoon, just hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I walked down the long, carpeted service corridor to check on the champagne inventory. The hallway was dimly lit and quiet, far away from the bustling activity of the guest areas. As I approached the corner leading to the loading dock, I heard the unmistakable sound of harsh, venomous whispering. I stopped dead in my tracks, pressing my back against the expensive wallpaper and inching closer to the edge of the wall. It was Kiara and Desmond. My fake sister was already dressed in her extravagant $15,000 lace wedding gown, holding the heavy skirt up with one hand while she pointed aggressively at my father with the other. Her face was flushed red with absolute fury. "I do not care how risky it is," Kiara hissed, her voice echoing faintly in the empty corridor. "Jamal is barely speaking to me, Desmond. His entire family is looking at me like I'm some kind of cheap con artist because of what happened last night. We have to completely destroy her credibility before the reception ends. If we do not, Jamal might actually annul the marriage by Monday." Desmond ran a hand nervously over his bald head, looking anxiously down the hallway. "Keep your voice down," he warned. "I already told you I have a plan. We just need to wait until the reception is in full swing. Everyone will be distracted by the speeches and the music. We will make sure she is out of the kitchen, and then we make our move. The police will have no choice but to arrest her this time. She will be taken away in handcuffs, and Yvonne will never speak to her again." I held my breath, listening to the sheer malice dripping from their words. They were not just trying to get me fired anymore. They were actively plotting to frame me for a major crime right in the middle of the wedding. They were planning something devastating, a final desperate strike to permanently remove me from their lives. A cold smile spread across my face, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. They thought they were setting a trap for a naive caterer. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into a minefield. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of highly orchestrated perfection. I stepped out of the shadows of the dimly lit service corridor and went right back to work in the kitchen. I had a massive luxury wedding to run and a devastating trap to set. I pushed the burning anger down deep into my chest, locking it away behind years of practiced discipline. At 4 o'clock, the string quartet began playing in the grand courtyard, signaling the start of the ceremony. The event was entirely flawless. I stood near the back edge of the manicured lawn, making sure the waitstaff was positioned correctly with the welcome drinks. From my vantage point, I watched Kiara walk down the long white aisle in her $15,000 lace gown, looking like the picture of perfect innocence. Jamal stood at the altar, his face a carefully guarded mask. He recited his vows because he was a man of honor, and because he did not want to cause a massive public spectacle before his mother and I had all our legal pieces in place. But I saw the slight hesitation in his voice. I noticed how he deliberately avoided making eye contact with my parents sitting in the front row. Yvonne Carter sat rigidly in her designated seat, her posture perfect, her eyes cold and calculating as she watched the family of thieves celebrate their stolen victory. After the ceremony concluded, the guests moved into the main ballroom for the 5-course dinner service. I directed my catering staff with absolute military precision. We delivered the truffle tarts, the roasted duck, and the filet mignon with zero errors. The massive room hummed with the sound of clinking crystal and wealthy conversation. Whenever I stepped out onto the ballroom floor to refill a water glass or check on the VIP tables, I caught Patricia and Kiara watching me. They were smirking. They traded highly satisfied little glances, whispering behind their expensive wine glasses. They honestly believed they had broken my spirit the night before. They thought my silence today was my ultimate submission. Every time I cleared a plate from the head table, I saw the arrogant gleam in my sister-us eyes. She thought I was just the defeated hired help who had finally accepted her miserable place at the bottom of the food chain. I offered them polite nods and kept my expression completely blank, letting them drown in their own false sense of absolute security. I wanted them to feel invincible. Invincible people are careless. Out in the main lobby of the venue, sitting on a beautifully draped table covered in white orchids, was the wedding gift box. It was a massive, thick, clear acrylic lockbox, designed specifically to hold cash envelopes and checks from the guests. Jamal U.S. family was incredibly affluent, and it was a well-known tradition in their social circle to gift large sums of money to the newlyweds to help them establish their new life. By the time the main dinner course was served, that clear box was completely stuffed to the brim with thick envelopes. I knew for a fact, because I had checked the venue security cameras earlier in the day, that it contained well over $50,000 in untraceable cash and high-value checks. It was an irresistible target for a family of career criminals. It was the perfect bait. As the dinner service concluded and the staff began clearing the heavy porcelain plates to prepare for the champagne toasts, I made a deliberate show of walking through the main ballroom. I carried a large, heavy plastic crate filled with empty champagne bottles, holding it high against my chest. I made sure to walk directly past the head table. I made sure Desmond saw me heading in the direction of the rear loading dock. I knew he was eagerly waiting for his window of opportunity. I spent exactly 10 minutes in the back corridor organizing crates by the open rear doors where my large catering van was parked. I stayed out of sight just long enough to give my father the time he needed to execute his reckless plan. Then I dusted off my chef coat and walked calmly back into the main ballroom, standing quietly in the shadows near the DJ booth to watch the show unfold. The DJ lowered the upbeat music to a soft instrumental hum. The best man had just finished his heartfelt speech and the crowd was laughing and clapping politely. Jamal stood up and took the microphone, preparing to give his groom-us toast to the room. But before Jamal could even speak a single word, Kiara suddenly leaped up from her chair at the head table. She stood up so violently that her heavy wooden chair crashed backward into a passing waiter. She did not apologize or even look at the man she had just hit. She pressed both of her hands to her cheeks, her eyes wide with manufactured absolute terror. She reached out and snatched the microphone directly out of Jamal's hand. A sharp, loud screech of audio feedback blasted through the massive speakers, causing several of the 300 guests to wince and cover their ears. The ballroom plunged into an instant heavy silence. The gift box, Kiara screamed, her voice cracking with perfectly rehearsed hysteria. The clear acrylic lockbox from the lobby table. It is gone. Someone took it. The elegant room erupted into instant chaotic murmuring. Guests craned their necks, twisting in their seats to look toward the open lobby doors. The table where the box had been sitting was entirely empty, save for a few scattered orchid petals. Jamal tried to put a calming hand on Kiara's shoulder, but she pulled away violently, stepping away from him to command the center of the floor. There was over $50,000 in there, Kiara sobbed, gripping the edges of her expensive white gown. All of our wedding gifts. All of the cash from our generous family and friends. It was sitting right there, secured on the table, and now it is completely gone. Someone came into our private event and stole our future. The performance was incredibly convincing. She cried real tears, her chest heaving as she looked desperately around the room. The Carter family looked deeply alarmed, whispering frantically among themselves. The timing of the entire stunt was absolutely impeccable. Right on cue, Patricia leaped out of her seat at the adjacent family table. She let out a loud, dramatic gasp that echoed clearly across the quiet, tense room. She slapped both of her hands over her mouth, looking absolutely horrified. But she did not look toward the lobby where the box had gone missing. She turned her entire body and pointed a shaking, trembling finger straight across the crowded ballroom directly at the shadows where I was standing. "Oh my goodness," Patricia shrieked, her voice cutting sharply over the murmurs of the confused crowd. "I saw her. I saw Aaliyah carrying something heavy out to her catering van just 10 minutes ago. I thought she was just taking out the kitchen trash, but she was holding something large and square hidden tightly against her chest. She is trying to leave with the money." Patricia's accusation hung in the heavy air of the ballroom like a lit match dropped into a pool of gasoline. The polite murmurs of the wealthy crowd instantly transformed into loud gasps of shock. 300 pairs of eyes shifted from the empty gift table directly to the shadows near the DJ booth where I was standing. I stepped forward into the warm light of the chandeliers, allowing my face to fall into a perfect mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "What are you talking about, Patricia?" I asked, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound desperate and defensive. "I was taking out empty champagne bottles. I do not have the box." Desmond seized his moment with the practiced ease of a lifelong con artist. He marched to the center of the dance floor, his chest puffed out with righteous indignation. "We are not taking any chances, Aaliyah," he boomed, his deep voice projecting over the shocked whispers of the guests. "That box contains $50,000 of my daughter-us future. You have been acting incredibly hostile toward her all day long. I want to see the inside of your catering van right now." He turned his body, addressing the Carter family and the VIP guests, directly inviting them to witness my public destruction. "Jamal, let us go," Desmond commanded, waving his arm toward the exit. "Let us put an end to this right now." The luxurious, elegant atmosphere of the wedding reception completely shattered, replaced by the grim, chaotic energy of a witch hunt. The entire wedding party practically stampedes out of the ballroom. Jamal led the way, his face a dark storm of confusion and mounting anger. Kiara clung desperately to his arm, burying her face into his expensive charcoal suit jacket and letting out loud, dramatic sobs. I walked completely surrounded by them like a prisoner being marched to the gallows. I kept my head down, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my chef apron, hiding the cold, calculated smile that was fighting to break across my lips. They were playing their part so flawlessly. They were marching blindly and arrogantly right into the abyss I had dug for them. We pushed through the heavy double-swinging doors that led down the rear service corridor. The air grew cooler as we approached the exit, and when Desmond shoved open the metal doors leading to the outdoor concrete loading dock, the crowd stopped dead in their tracks. The cool night air hit us, but what truly shocked the wedding party was the harsh, blinding glare of flashing red and blue lights. 2 local police cruisers were already parked directly behind my white catering van, effectively blocking it from moving an inch. 2 uniformed officers were standing by the hoods of their vehicles, their radios crackling in the quiet night. A sharp ripple of confusion went through the Carter family. Jamal stopped walking, his brow furrowing deeply. "Wait a minute," Jamal said, his voice cutting sharply through the noise of the crowd. "Kiara just realized the box was missing 2 minutes ago. We literally just walked out here. How are the police already parked at the loading dock?" Desmond did not miss a single beat. He stepped forward, looking deeply solemn and perfectly in control. "I called them 10 minutes ago, Jamal." Desmond lied effortlessly, his face the picture of fatherly concern. "When Patricia told me she saw Aaliyah acting suspicious sneaking around the back of the venue, I did not want to cause a massive panic in the middle of your ballroom toast. I contacted the authorities quietly so they could handle this like professionals. I am so incredibly sorry it has come to this on your special day." It was a brilliant lie. To the uninformed guests, it made Desmond look like a protective, quick-thinking patriarch. But I caught Yvonne Carter's eye near the back of the crowd. The wealthy matriarch stood perfectly still, her arms crossed over her chest, watching my father with a gaze so sharp it could cut glass. She knew exactly what this was. The 2 police officers approached the concrete loading dock, resting their hands cautiously on their heavy utility belts. They looked up at the crowd of people in expensive gowns and tailored suits. "Who is the owner of the white catering van parked in Bay 3? The taller officer asked, his voice projecting authority. I stepped forward, separating myself from the crowd. I kept my shoulders slumped and my posture entirely defeated. "It is my van," I said quietly. The officer walked up the short flight of concrete stairs to stand directly in front of me. "Ma'am, we received a report of grand larceny regarding a cash lockbox belonging to the bride and groom," he stated flatly. "I need you to step back and open the rear doors of your vehicle immediately." Before I could even reach into my pocket, Patricia burst into a fresh wave of highly theatrical tears. She rushed forward, pushing past Jamal, and grabbed the police officer's arm. "Please, you have to be gentle with her," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with the agonizing sorrow of a heartbroken mother. "She has always been troubled, officer. She has a terrible history of taking things that simply do not belong to her. We tried to give her a job to keep her supervised. We tried to keep her close and show her love, but she just cannot help herself. Please do not hurt her. She is sick." The sheer audacity of her performance was breathtaking. She was standing there wearing a designer gown, paid for by my stolen inheritance, begging the police to show mercy to the child she had kidnapped and enslaved. The officer nodded sympathetically at Patricia, gently removing her manicured hand from his uniform sleeve. "I understand, ma'am, but we have to follow protocol," he said softly, before turning his attention back to me. His expression hardened instantly. "Keys. Right now." I reached into the deep pocket of my apron and pulled out the heavy metal ring of keys. My hands were visibly shaking, which only made Kiara sob louder into Jamala's shoulder. I handed the keys over to the officer without saying a word. The crowd held its collective breath. The only sound in the night air was the low hum of the police cruiser engines and the crackle of the radios. The officer stepped down from the dock and walked to the rear of my large catering van. He inserted the silver key into the heavy metal lock. He turned it with a loud mechanical click and pulled the large double doors wide open. The bright, harsh interior lights of the van flickered on, automatically illuminating the stacks of stainless steel prep tables and extra catering equipment. And right there, sitting blatantly obvious on the ribbed metal floor, directly next to 3 wooden crates of vintage champagne, was the thick, clear acrylic lockbox. It was completely stuffed to the brim, with the white wedding cash envelopes exactly where Kiara and Desmond had planted it. A massive collective gasp of horror echoed across the loading dock. Several of Jamal's U.S. relatives began shouting in angry disbelief. Kiara let out a triumphant little whimper, burying her face deeper into her husband's chest. Patricia covered her face with her hands, pretending to weep at the tragic confirmation of my guilt. The police officer stared at the box of cash for a long, silent moment. He did not touch the money. He slowly turned his head, locked his stern eyes directly onto mine, and reached down to his utility belt. With a sharp metallic scrape, he pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic scrape of the heavy steel handcuffs being pulled from the officer's utility belt echoed like a gunshot across the silent concrete loading dock. The taller officer took a decisive step forward, his heavy black boots planting firmly on the pavement. "Ma'am," he commanded, his voice projecting the absolute unyielding authority of the law. "I need you to turn around and place both hands behind your back." The wealthy wedding guests standing behind the police cruisers let out a collective horrified gasp. A few of Jamal's older aunts turned their faces away, too scandalized to watch a criminal arrest happen at a high society event. The elegant atmosphere of the evening had completely evaporated, leaving behind the cold, grim reality of a crime scene. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, observing the absolute masterpiece of deception playing out in front of me. Kiara had buried her face into Jamal's expensive charcoal suit jacket, her shoulders shaking with loud theatrical sobs. She was playing the role of the devastated bride flawlessly, but for a fraction of a second she shifted her head. She looked at me from the corner of her eye, and a malicious, triumphant smile flashed across her perfectly glossed lips. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally crushed the adopted sister who dared to step out of the basement. She thought she had permanently removed the only threat to her stolen luxury lifestyle. Desmond was putting on an equally repulsive performance. My father crossed his thick arms over his chest, rocking back on his heels with a deeply victorious posture. He looked like a king who had just successfully executed a peasant rebellion. He nodded solemnly at the police officers, a look of fake, tragic acceptance plastered across his face. He even reached out to pat Patricia's shoulder as she leaned against a nearby bridesmaid, pretending to be so overcome with the shame of my existence that she could barely stand upright. They were so incredibly confident. They had spent 32 years manipulating the truth, stealing my money, and abusing my spirit without ever facing a single consequence. They genuinely believed that their wealth, their tailored suits, and their practiced tears would always protect them. They believed the police would look at me, a woman in a stained chef coat standing next to a box of stolen cash, and blindly drag me away without asking a single question. But I was not the scared little girl they had raised in the dark anymore. I was a woman who had spent her entire life learning how to survive in a hostile environment, and I had prepared for this exact moment. "Turn around right now," the officer repeated, his tone dropping into a harsh, aggressive warning. He unlatched the hinge of the steel cuffs, preparing to forcibly grab my wrist. "If you resist arrest, this will go from a simple theft charge to something much worse. Do not make this difficult, Aaliyah." Jamal suddenly stepped forward, physically pulling himself away from Kiara's desperate grip. The sheer stress and profound confusion of the evening were etched deeply into his handsome face. He was an honorable man, watching his entire wedding day collapse into a chaotic criminal circus, and he was not willing to let mob mentality dictate the outcome. "Officer, please wait." "Just a moment," Jamal pleaded, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "She has absolutely no prior record. She is a highly respected business owner in this city. Can we at least give her a chance to speak before we put her in chains in front of 300 people?" Desmond immediately pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face flushing red with sudden, boiling anger. He could not risk me opening my mouth. He could not risk Jamal giving me a platform to defend myself. "We do not need to hear anything she has to say," Jamal Desmond barked, dropping the fake sympathetic father routine and letting his true ruthless nature slip through. "The stolen money is sitting right there in the back of her van. She was caught red-handed trying to ruin your future. Officer, do your job and take this thief away." I looked directly at Desmond. I let a slow, freezing calm wash over my features. The frantic, terrified expression I had been faking just moments ago completely vanished without a trace. I saw my father's victorious smirk falter for a split second as he registered the sudden shift in my demeanor. I was not crying. I was not shaking. I was not begging for mercy. I turned my attention back to the taller police officer. I did not move my hands toward my back. I stood my ground on the concrete dock, squaring my shoulders and looking him dead in the eye. "Officer, I am completely willing to cooperate with your investigation," I said. My voice was incredibly steady, cutting through the cool night air with absolute precision. "I am not resisting arrest, but I am asking you to pause for exactly 2 minutes before you place those steel cuffs on my wrists." The officer hesitated. He looked at my entirely calm expression and then glanced at the hysterical, shouting family members behind me. In his line of work, guilty people panicked. Guilty people ran, cried, or fought aggressively. They did not stand perfectly still and ask for 2 minutes with the polite, commanding authority of a corporate executive. He could sense that something about this entire setup was fundamentally wrong. 2 minutes for what the officer asked, his eyes narrowing in deep suspicion. He kept the handcuffs ready, but he did not step any closer to me. "I run a premium private catering company," I explained, keeping my movements slow and deliberate so they would not be misinterpreted as a physical threat. "I regularly transport tens of thousands of dollars worth of high-end culinary equipment, imported ingredients, and cash payments. Because of the high-value nature of my business, I take security extremely seriously." I reached my right hand slowly into the deep front pocket of my white chef apron. Desmond tensed, taking a slight step backward, as if I were about to pull out a weapon. Patricia stopped her fake crying instantly, her breath catching audibly in her throat. Even Kiara peeked out from behind Jamal, her malicious smile completely replaced by a sudden creeping look of absolute dread. She did not know what I was reaching for, but her instincts were finally warning her that she had made a fatal miscalculation. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. The bright digital screen illuminated my face in the dark shadow of the loading dock. I unlocked the device with my thumb and opened a specific encrypted application. The screen loaded instantly, displaying a highly sophisticated grid interface. I looked past the police officers, locking my gaze directly onto Desmond and Kiara. The sheer terror blossoming in their eyes was absolutely exquisite. They finally realized that they had not cornered me. I had cornered them. I had let them dig their own grave and jump right inside. I turned the glowing screen of my phone around, holding it up so both police officers could clearly see the application dashboard. Before you process my arrest for grand larceny, I stated, my voice ringing out clearly across the dead silent parking lot. I need you to review the motion-activated 360-degree security cameras I have installed inside and outside my vehicle. The taller police officer froze with the heavy steel handcuffs suspended halfway between his utility belt and my wrists. The absolute certainty in my voice completely halted his momentum. He looked at the glowing screen of my cell phone and then looked back at my face. I did not wait for him to give me verbal permission. I reached into the deep pocket of my chef apron and pulled out the large black venue management tablet I had used the night before. I tapped the screen, pairing my phone directly to the tablet so the video would display on a large high-definition monitor for everyone to see. I turned the volume up to its maximum capacity. I wanted every single wealthy guest, every Carter family member, and most importantly Jamal, to hear exactly what was about to play. My catering van is equipped with a state-of-the-art commercial security system. I explained, my voice echoing clearly over the quiet hum of the police cruisers. It records in brilliant 4K resolution. It features infrared night vision and highly sensitive directional microphones. The system automatically uploads the footage to a secure cloud server the moment it detects physical motion within 10 feet of the vehicle. You cannot delete it and you cannot tamper with it. I held the large tablet out, offering it directly to the police officer. He slowly lowered the handcuffs, keeping them gripped in his left hand, while he reached out with his right to take the tablet. I tapped the play icon on the screen. The video loaded instantly. The timestamp was boldly and undeniably displayed in the bottom right corner of the footage. It read, exactly 22 minutes ago. This was the precise moment I was standing in the center of the brightly lit ballroom, carrying empty champagne bottles directly in front of 300 witnesses. The high-definition footage showed the empty concrete loading dock, bathed in the pale yellow light of the security lamps. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the heavy metal service doors swung open. Two figures stepped out into the cool night air. A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the crowd of wedding guests standing behind the police cars. The footage was completely undeniable. Stepping into the frame, looking around with paranoid, frantic energy, was Desmond. And right behind him, holding the heavy skirt of her $15,000 lace wedding gown in one hand and clutching the massive clear acrylic cash box against her hip with the other, was the beautiful blushing bride, Kiara. The crowd went completely dead silent. The only sound left in the world was the crisp, clear audio playing from the tablet speakers. "Hurry up before someone walks out here," Desmond's voice hissed from the speakers. The directional microphones picked up his frantic whisper with absolute terrifying clarity. Kiara stepped fully into the frame. She was not crying. She was not a traumatized victim who had just realized her future was stolen. She was grinning. A massive, malicious, completely wicked smile stretched across her face. "I cannot believe this is actually going to work," Kiara laughed on the video. Her voice sounded cruel and arrogant, echoing loudly across the parking lot for her new husband to hear. "Let us see the golden girl cater her way out of a federal prison sentence." On the screen, Desmond walked straight to the back doors of my white van. He did not pull out a set of keys. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a small, specialized metal tension tool. He leaned close to the lock, and within 3 seconds, the heavy metal mechanism popped open with a loud, distinct click. He was a seasoned professional. He pulled the double doors wide open. "Push it all the way to the back," Desmond instructed, waving his hand aggressively. "Hide it behind the champagne crates so she cannot claim she saw it sitting there when she opened the doors." Kiara eagerly stepped up to the bumper of the van. She hoisted the heavy acrylic lockbox packed with $50,000 of her own wedding gifts and shoved it deep into the back of my vehicle, exactly where the police officer had just discovered it. She dusted her hands off her face, glowing with the sick satisfaction of ruining my life. Desmond slammed the van doors shut. Then right there on the high-definition security footage, my fake father and my fake sister raised their hands and high-fived. They actually high-fived each other over successfully framing me for grand larceny. They turned around and jogged back inside the venue to start their theatrical performance in the ballroom. The video ended freezing on the final frame of Kiara U.S. vicious smiling face. The silence that descended upon the loading dock was absolute and suffocating. The air felt so heavy it was hard to breathe. I did not look at Kiara. I did not look at Desmond. I looked straight at Jamal. Jamal was standing entirely paralyzed. The handsome, confident architect looked as though the ground beneath him had just opened up and swallowed him whole. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of absolute horror, profound disgust, and a devastating heartbreak. He slowly turned his head away from the tablet screen and looked down at his bride. Kiara was no longer crying crocodile tears. Her hands had dropped from Jamal's jacket. The fake sobs had vanished entirely. She was trembling so violently that the delicate lace of her wedding dress visibly shook. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale, sickly, and utterly terrified. She opened her mouth to speak, to formulate some kind of lie or excuse, but no words came out. There was no excuse for a high-definition video with crystal-clear audio. She was trapped. Patricia looked like she had just been struck by lightning. She took a stumbling step backward, clutching her chest, her mouth hanging wide open in silent shock. The protective, heartbroken mother routine she had just performed for the police officers was instantly exposed as a sickening, manipulative lie. The taller police officer stared at the frozen screen of the tablet for a long, heavy moment. The sympathetic demeanor he had shown Patricia just minutes ago was completely gone. Law enforcement officers absolutely despise being manipulated. They despise being used as personal weapons in vindictive family vendettas. He realized with chilling clarity that he had been seconds away from placing an innocent woman in handcuffs, seconds away from making a wrongful arrest, based entirely on the fabricated lies of the people standing right in front of him. The officer slowly reached out and handed the tablet back to me. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched visibly in his cheek. The heavy steel handcuffs he was still holding in his left hand dropped back down to his side, clattering loudly against his utility belt. He took a deliberate step away from me, completely removing me from his physical focus. The officer turned his entire body slowly and methodically. He raised his head and locked his intense, furious glare directly onto Desmond and Kiara. The shift in his posture was terrifying. He was no longer dealing with a grieving family who had been robbed. He was looking at two prime suspects caught dead to rights committing multiple felonies. The color completely drained from my sister's face as the officer rested his hand firmly on his radio. The sharp crackle of the police radio broke the paralyzing silence of the loading dock. The taller officer pressed the button on his shoulder mic requesting backup units for a confirmed grand larceny and a false police report. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on my fake family. The steel trap had completely shut and there was no way out. Patricia was the first one to crack. The poised, elegant mother of the bride completely vanished, replaced by a frantic, desperate woman desperately trying to claw her way out of a federal charge. She lunged forward, her manicured hands waving wildly in the air. "Wait, please, wait!" Patricia stuttered, her voice pitching into a shrill, hysterical register. "Officer, you are completely misunderstanding what you just saw. This is not a crime. It was a prank. It was just a silly wedding prank that went a little too far." Kiara and Aaliyah have this running sibling rivalry. They are always playing practical jokes on each other. Kiara just wanted to give her sister a little scare on her big day. "We were going to come right back out here and tell everyone the truth in a few minutes. You cannot arrest people over a family joke." Her fake, desperate laugh echoed against the concrete walls of the loading dock. It sounded completely deranged. Nobody was laughing. The wealthy wedding guests standing behind the police cruiser stared at Patricia with absolute revulsion. They were not fools. They had just watched a high-definition video of a father and daughter picking a lock and celebrating the destruction of a woman's life. You do not call the police and demand a strip search as a prank. Jamal had heard enough. He had stood by Kiara when the diamond bracelet went missing, giving her the benefit of the doubt. He had defended her character to his own family. But witnessing this level of calculated malicious evil was the absolute breaking point. Jamal looked down at his beautiful bride clutching his arm. He did not gently pull away this time. He physically shoved her off of him. The movement was so forceful that Kiara stumbled backward, her high heels scraping loudly against the concrete. Jamal took 2 massive steps away from her, treating her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. "Do not touch me," Jamal said, his deep voice trembling with a mixture of profound rage and absolute horror. "You framed your own sister for a felony. You planted $50,000 in her van, and then you stood there and cried into my shoulder. You let your father call the police to have her arrested in front of my entire family. Jamal, I can explain." Kiara pleaded, tears of genuine terror streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. She took a step toward him, her hands outstretched. "Please, Jamal, you have to listen to me. She is awful. She has been trying to ruin my wedding all day. I just wanted to teach her a lesson." Jamal held his hand up, stopping her in her tracks. "You are sick," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, disgusted whisper. "You and your parents are completely sick. I do not even know who you are." The taller police officer stepped squarely in front of Desmond, completely ignoring Patricia's frantic stuttering. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, his face set in a mask of professional fury. "Desmond, you are the one who dialed emergency services and reported a grand larceny." The officer stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You provided a false description of events. You actively tampered with evidence, and you conspired to falsely imprison an innocent woman. Sir, I need you to turn around and place both of your hands flat against the back of that van right now." Desmond's face turned a sickly shade of gray. The arrogant, powerful patriarch routine entirely collapsed. He looked frantically at his high society friends standing in the crowd, searching for someone, anyone to intervene on his behalf. But the guests simply looked away, deeply embarrassed to even be associated with him. Desmond slowly raised his shaking hands, preparing to place them against the cold metal of the vehicle. The second officer moved toward Kiara, pulling out a second set of handcuffs to arrest the bride. It was the perfect moment. It was everything I had envisioned for years. Watching them face the brutal consequences of their own cruelty was incredibly satisfying. But as I stood there on the cold concrete dock, I realized that having them arrested in the dark parking lot was simply not enough. If they were quietly placed into the back of police cruisers and driven away right now, they would still retain a tiny shred of their dignity. The wedding guests inside the ballroom who had not followed us outside would never know the full truth. They would just assume there was a tragic misunderstanding. Patricia would spend the next 10 years spinning a false narrative, playing the victim and complaining about the unfair justice system. I needed them to be completely destroyed. I needed the execution to be entirely public. I needed Yvonne Carter to drop the final guillotine blade under the bright crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom so they could never show their faces in polite society ever again. I stepped forward, inserting myself directly between the police officers and my fake family. "Officer, please wait," I said, keeping my voice calm and perfectly measured. The taller officer stopped, looking at me with deep confusion. "Ma'am, you are the victim of a coordinated crime," he explained gently but firmly. "We have them caught on tape. We need to process them immediately and secure the stolen cash box as evidence." "I understand that," I replied, locking eyes with the officer. "And I fully intend to press maximum charges against both of them. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But I am also the legal owner of this entire estate, and I am the executive chef who prepared the 5-course meal waiting inside. There are 300 guests currently sitting in my ballroom, completely unaware of what is happening out here." I gestured toward the heavy metal doors of the venue, where the faint thumping bass of the reception music could still be heard. If you arrest the bride and the father of the bride out here in the dark, it will cause a massive chaotic panic inside my venue, I explained, projecting the image of a highly responsible business owner. I do not want my property damaged by a panicked crowd, and I do not want Jamal You's family to have their entire evening ruined by these criminals. Please let them walk back inside. Let them sit down at their head table. Let them have their reception. I will press charges immediately after the cake is cut. The officer studied my face. He looked at the pristine white chef coat I wore and the absolute calm authority in my posture. He then looked at Desmond and Kiara, who were standing there completely defeated, trembling in the cool night air. The officers realized they had secured the perimeter. They had the video evidence safely uploaded to the cloud, and they had the stolen cash box in their possession. The suspects were not going anywhere. The taller officer nodded slowly, tapping his radio. "Dispatch, we are going to hold position at the venue," he communicated, keeping his eyes fixed on Desmond. "Suspects are contained. We will proceed with the arrest shortly. Send 2 additional units to secure the front and rear exits of the building. Nobody leaves." He lowered the radio and pointed a stern finger at my father. "You are going to walk back inside that building," the officer ordered, his voice dangerously low. "You are going to sit down, and you are going to stay completely quiet. If you try to run, if you try to cause a scene, or if you even look at this woman the wrong way, I will tackle you to the floor and cuff you in front of your friends. Do you understand me?" Desmond swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat running down the side of his bald head. He nodded weakly, unable to speak. Kiara looked completely broken. The malicious, confident girl who had ruined my expensive appetizers that morning was gone. She was clutching her heavy lace dress, shivering uncontrollably, fully aware that she was walking back into a room filled with people who were about to watch her entire life end. I turned around and walked toward the heavy metal service doors. The Carter family parted like the Red Sea, allowing me to pass through them. Jamal walked close behind me, his head held high, but his eyes completely dead. And trailing behind us, walking with the slow, agonizing pace of prisoners marching to the execution chamber, were Desmond, Kiara, and Patricia. We pushed through the double doors and stepped back into the warm, brightly lit service corridor. The sound of the wedding music grew louder with every step. I marched straight toward the main ballroom, leaving the police officers stationed like heavily armed guards at the exits. I had given my fake family a temporary reprieve, but they knew exactly what was coming. They were walking back into the spotlight for their final performance, and I was about to drop the curtain on their entire stolen existence. The transition from the cold, dimly lit concrete loading dock back into the grand ballroom was like stepping onto another planet. As we pushed through the heavy wooden doors, the warm golden light from the massive crystal chandeliers washed over us. The air was thick with the rich scents of roasted garlic, red wine, and expensive floral centerpieces. The 300 guests were completely oblivious to the criminal reckoning that had just occurred mere feet outside the building. They were laughing, clinking their crystal glasses, and enjoying the decadent 5-course meal I had painstakingly prepared for them. The upbeat reception music pulsed through the floorboards, creating a sickeningly joyful contrast to the absolute devastation radiating from the wedding party. I walked near the back of the group, watching the psychological torture take immediate effect. Desmond, Kiara, and Patricia were no longer walking like the arrogant high society royalty they pretended to be. They shuffled forward like condemned prisoners, taking their final steps toward the gallows. Their shoulders were slumped and their eyes darted nervously around the room, terrified that the police officers stationed at the venue exits would suddenly march in and drag them away. They were trapped inside a beautiful, luxurious cage of their own making. Jamal walked straight to the head table, his posture incredibly rigid. He pulled his chair out and sat down heavily, staring blankly at the pristine white tablecloth. When Kiara reached the table, she hesitated. She reached out a trembling hand, hoping to rest it on his arm, seeking any shred of the comfort and protection he had always provided her. The moment her fingers brushed the fabric of his charcoal suit jacket, Jamal violently flinched. He pulled his arm away as if her touch caused him actual physical pain. He shifted his heavy wooden chair several inches to the right, creating a highly visible physical barrier between himself and his new bride. He did not look at her. He did not speak to her. He picked up his glass of sparkling water and took a slow, deliberate sip, staring straight ahead into the crowd. Kiara slowly sank into her chair, her face a mask of pale, sheer terror. The $15,000 lace wedding gown that had looked so magnificent earlier in the day now just looked like a heavy, suffocating costume. Patricia sat down next to Desmond, her hands shaking so violently that she immediately knocked over her tall crystal water goblet. The ice-cold water spilled across the table, soaking into the expensive linens and dripping onto her lap, but she did not even seem to notice. Desmond frantically grabbed a cloth napkin to mop up the mess, plastering a horrifying stiff smile onto his face, as several guests from nearby tables turned to look at the commotion. He was desperately trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy, hoping against all logic that if he just played along the nightmare, would somehow disappear. At the far end of the VIP section, Yvonne Carter sat perfectly still. She had not followed the crowd out to the parking lot, but she knew exactly what had transpired. Her sharp, calculating brown eyes tracked my every movement as I walked across the perimeter of the ballroom. She looked at Desmond and Patricia with a gaze so intensely cold it could have frozen water. The matriarch of the Carter family was holding court, waiting for the execution to begin. I slipped quietly back into the massive industrial kitchen for just a few minutes. I needed to ensure my catering staff was prepared for the fallout. I instructed my sous chefs to begin plating the dessert courses and told the waitstaff to stand by the perimeter walls until further notice. I smoothed down the front of my crisp white chef coat, taking one long, deep breath. The quiet resilience that had kept me alive in their windowless basement for so many years was gone, entirely replaced by an undeniable burning demand for absolute justice. I stepped back out into the grand ballroom. The oblivious DJ, situated on a raised platform near the dance floor, grabbed his microphone. He was a highly energetic man, completely unaware that he was hosting a room full of felons. He tapped the mic, sending a soft, thumping echo through the massive speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm. "If I could please have your attention, we are going to slow things down for just a moment to celebrate the incredible bond of family. It is time for the traditional father and daughter dance. I would like to invite the beautiful bride Kiara and her father Desmond to the center of the dance floor." The guests erupted into warm, polite applause. Several older relatives let out sentimental sighs, reaching for their cameras. The sheer profound irony of the announcement almost made me laugh out loud. The incredible bond of family. A bond forged in kidnapping, grand larceny, and a coordinated attempt to frame an innocent woman for a major felony just 20 minutes prior. At the head table, Desmond froze. He looked absolutely panic-stricken, staring at the DJ, as if the man had just asked him to walk into an active fire. He looked over at the heavy oak doors at the back of the room, where the silhouettes of the two police officers were clearly visible through the frosted glass. He knew they were watching his every move. He knew he was under strict orders to behave. Swallowing hard, Desmond stood up and buttoned his tuxedo jacket. He leaned down and whispered something harshly through his gritted teeth to Kiara. He was undoubtedly ordering her to get up and smile to perform for the crowd, so they would not suspect anything was wrong before they could figure a way out of this disaster. Kiara looked physically ill, but she obeyed. She stood up, her legs shaking visibly beneath her heavy lace skirt. Desmond extended his arm and she took it. Together they walked slowly to the center of the polished wooden dance floor. The overhead chandeliers dimmed, and a warm, bright spotlight hit them, cutting through the darkness of the room. The DJ pressed play. A slow, highly emotional acoustic ballad filled the ballroom. Desmond placed one hand on his daughter's waist and held her other hand in the air. They began to sway awkwardly to the music. To the 300 guests watching from their tables, it was a beautiful, poignant moment between a loving father and his precious golden child. But from where I was standing, the truth was blindingly obvious. Desmond was gripping Kiara's hand so tightly his knuckles were turning white. Kiara was staring over his shoulder, her eyes wide and completely vacant, her breathing shallow and rapid. They were not dancing. They were clinging to each other in sheer absolute terror. It was time. I was not going to let them finish their pathetic little performance. I was not going to let them pretend to be a loving family for 1 second longer. I stepped out of the shadows near the kitchen doors and began to walk. I did not rush. My pace was slow, deliberate, and entirely lethal. Every step my black non-slip work shoes took against the hardwood floor felt like the steady ticking of a bomb. Several guests at the tables closest to the dance floor noticed me. They frowned confused as to why the executive chef was marching directly onto the floor during such a private, intimate moment. I walked straight past the head table. I felt Jamal watch me pass, his eyes tracking me with a mixture of dread and anticipation. I approached the raised platform of the DJ booth. The DJ looked down at me, his energetic smile faltering as he registered the cold, completely deadpan expression on my face. He leaned over the turntable, holding his hand up as if to ask what I needed. I did not answer him. I reached right past him, grabbing the thick black auxiliary cord plugged into the main soundboard. I pulled it out with a sharp, violent yank. The sentimental acoustic ballad cut off, instantly replaced by a harsh, loud electronic pop that echoed violently through the massive speakers. The sudden deafening silence in the room was absolute. The 300 guests gasped, shifting in their seats and looking around in confusion. Out on the dance floor, Desmond and Kiara froze, completely paralyzed in the bright glare of the spotlight. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of a massive speeding truck. The DJ opened his mouth to protest, reaching for the cord, but I shot him a glare so fierce he immediately backed away, raising his hands in surrender. I reached down and picked up the heavy wireless microphone resting on his table. I gripped the cool metal tightly in my right hand, turning my body to face the massive crowd of affluent guests. I looked directly at Desmond and Kiara, trembling in the center of the floor. I looked at Patricia, shaking at the head table. I looked at the Carter family, staring at me with bated breath. Before we celebrate this beautiful family, I announced to the 300 silent guests, my voice echoing with devastating clarity across the grand ballroom. I have a very special video presentation for the bride and her parents. I reached into the deep pocket of my chef apron and pressed the master control button on my venue management tablet. Directly behind the head table, a massive motorized projector screen slowly began to descend from the ceiling. It unrolled with a quiet, mechanical hum, casting a huge blank white canvas over the elaborate wall of imported white orchids that Patricia had spent thousands of dollars to arrange. The 300 guests immediately shifted in their seats. They all leaned forward, expecting the usual light-hearted wedding entertainment. They fully expected a heartwarming slideshow of beautiful baby pictures set to soft, emotional music. They expected to see Kiara growing up in the lap of luxury, surrounded by a loving family. Instead, the heavy commercial projector mounted on the ceiling clicked on and beamed a stark, high-definition image directly across the massive screen. It was not a photograph of a smiling family. It was a scanned high-resolution copy of a heavily redacted legal document. I raised the heavy wireless microphone to my lips. My voice echoed with cold, absolute authority, cutting entirely through the confused silence of the massive ballroom. 32 years ago, a tragic car accident claimed the life of a wealthy single mother. I began my words ringing out over the sound system like a judge reading a final devastating verdict. Her 2-year-old daughter miraculously survived the horrific crash without a single scratch. But in the absolute chaos of the funeral and the subsequent estate settlement, that grieving toddler vanished without a trace. The local authorities falsely believed she had been taken by a distant out-of-state relative. The grieving family spent millions of dollars searching for her, hiring the best private investigators in the country, but the trail went completely cold. I tapped the screen of my tablet. The slide changed instantly. The image of the forged adoption certificate appeared on the massive projector screen. The fraudulent signatures of Patricia and Desmond were highlighted in bright, glaring yellow ink for the entire room to see. The truth is, the child was not taken by a distant relative. I continued stepping slowly away from the DJ booth and moving closer to the center of the polished hardwood dance floor. She was legally kidnapped by her mother, U.S. live-in maid. The maid forged the adoption papers, manipulating a broken system and crossing state lines to hide the child from her biological family. She did not take the toddler out of a sense of love or maternal duty. She took her because that specific child was the sole beneficiary of a massive, irrevocable trust fund. I tapped the tablet screen again. A meticulously organized 30-year timeline of banking statements flooded the projector screen. Rows upon rows of financial transfers were clearly visible, showing hundreds of thousands of dollars being moved month after month from the orphaned trust fund directly into an offshore bank account controlled entirely by Patricia and Desmond. For over 3 decades, the people sitting right here at this head table have been maliciously siphoning millions of dollars from an orphaned child, I announced, my voice rising with an uncontainable, righteous power. They used my stolen inheritance to buy their sprawling suburban home. They used my money to pay for Kiara's expensive private school tuition, her luxury vehicles, and every single extravagant detail of this very wedding reception. A collective wave of pure, unadulterated horror washed over the entire ballroom. You could hear a pin drop in the spaces between my words. Then the frantic whispers erupted. They were not polite high society murmurs. They were loud, disgusted gasps and harsh exclamations of absolute shock. The wealthy elite guests who had just spent the entire evening making polite small talk with my fake parents were now staring at them as if they were violent, dangerous monsters. I was that toddler, I said, pressing my hand firmly against my chest. They stole my entire life. And while they raised their biological daughter like a spoiled princess, they forced me to sleep in a damp, windowless concrete basement. They made me scrub their floors, wash their clothes, and endure their constant psychological abuse. They spent 32 years convincing me I was a worthless burden, while they secretly drained my multi-million-dollar estate to fund their entire fake, luxurious existence. I tapped the tablet one final time. The ultimate, undeniable piece of evidence flashed onto the screen. It was the official medical laboratory DNA test result, displaying the 99.9% genetic match between myself and the Carter family bloodline. Patricia simply could not handle the exposure. The flawlessly maintained illusion of wealth and superiority she had constructed over 32 years completely shattered in front of her high society friends. She let out a choked, agonizing gasp. Her knees buckled violently beneath her, and she collapsed heavily into her wooden dining chair, covering her face with both of her shaking hands as she began to sob hysterically. There was absolutely no escaping this reality. It was not a rumor. It was hard, undeniable documentary evidence projected in 20-foot letters for the entire world to witness. Desmond reacted exactly the way a seasoned coward always does when completely cornered. He did not try to verbally defend his wife. He did not try to comfort his terrified daughter. He looked up at the massive projector screen, looked out at the furious, disgusted faces of the 300 guests, and realized his life of freedom was entirely over. He spun around, knocking his crystal water goblet onto the floor, and made a desperate, frantic sprint toward the side exit of the ballroom. Desmond barely made it 5 steps before the heavy oak doors of the side exit swung wide open. 2 massive uniformed police officers stepped directly into the doorway, physically blocking his escape path with their bodies. Desmond skidded to a halt, his expensive dress shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished hardwood floor. He was completely trapped, with nowhere left to run. At the far end of the VIP section, the heavy scraping sound of a chair being pushed back drew the immediate attention of the entire room. Yvonne Carter stood up. The elegant, powerful matriarch of the Carter family was not alone. Flanking her on either side were 2 incredibly sharp-looking men dressed in dark, tailored suits. They were her lead corporate attorneys, and they were holding thick leather briefcases filled with the legal ammunition required to completely obliterate my fake parents. Yvonne did not raise her voice. She did not need to shout to command the room. Her absolute authority demanded the immediate silent respect of the massive ballroom. She stepped out from behind her decorated table and walked slowly, deliberately toward the head table. Every single eye in the venue followed her confident strides. She stopped just a few feet away from where Patricia was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. "You stole my blood," Yvonne stated, her voice dripping with a lethal, freezing venom that made the surrounding guests physically shiver. "You lived in my sister us home. You ate her food. And when she died, you stole her only child to fund your pathetic, greedy lifestyle. You watched me mourn my niece for 32 years while you treated her like a common slave in your house." Patricia tried to speak. She lowered her trembling hands, revealing a face completely ruined by running mascara and sheer absolute terror. "Yvonne, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "We gave her a home. We raised her like she was our own." "You held her hostage," Yvonne snapped, cutting the lie off instantly. "You stole her inheritance, but you will never spend another dime of it. As of an hour ago, my legal team secured an emergency federal injunction against both of you. We have officially frozen every single bank account, every investment portfolio, and every hidden asset in your names. The house you currently live in, the cars you drive, the designer clothes on your back, it all belongs to Aaliyah now. You are entirely destitute." The absolute finality of Yvonne's words sent a massive shockwave through the room. Patricia let out a loud, guttural scream of absolute despair. Her entire stolen empire had completely evaporated in the span of 5 minutes. Kiara had been sitting frozen in her chair, staring up at the projector screen with wide, unblinking eyes. The reality of the situation finally crashed down heavily onto her shoulders. The money was completely gone. The massive trust fund she had been leeching off of her entire life was completely frozen. She had no career. She had no savings account of her own. She had absolutely nothing left to her name. She threw herself onto the floor, dropping to her knees right in front of Jamal. The heavy $15,000 lace wedding gown pooled around her on the hardwood floor, looking like a discarded cheap theatrical prop. She grabbed Jamal's hands, holding onto his fingers like a drowning woman, desperately clinging to a life raft. "Jamal, please!" Kiara screamed, real tears streaming rapidly down her face. "I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know the full extent of it. I thought she was just adopted from a normal agency. I did not know my parents stole her money. You have to believe me. You are my husband, Jamal. You have to protect me from them. We are legally married." Jamal looked down at the woman kneeling, pathetic and broken, at his feet. The handsome, warm, compassionate architect I had known for months was completely gone. His face was a hardened mask of cold, impenetrable disgust. He looked at her as if she were a venomous snake that had just tried to strike him. He had watched the high-definition security footage out in the parking lot. He had heard her laugh with pure malice as she planted the stolen cash box in my van. He knew exactly what kind of monster she truly was behind the pretty smile. "You knew," Jamal said, his voice incredibly quiet, but carrying a devastating emotional weight. "You may not have known about the initial kidnapping, but you knew you were maliciously torturing an innocent woman today. You smiled when you tried to send her to a federal prison. You are just as fundamentally evil as they are." Jamal slowly, forcefully pulled his hands out of her desperate, frantic grip. He reached over to his left hand and pinched the heavy gold wedding band he had placed on his finger just a few hours ago. He slid the ring off his knuckle. He did not throw it in anger. He simply dropped it. The heavy gold band fell silently into the folds of Kiara's ruined white lace dress. "My annulment attorney will contact you first thing tomorrow morning," Jamal stated flatly. "Do not ever speak to me again." Jamal turned his broad back on her. He walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, pushing past the shocked, murmuring guests, and walking directly out the front doors of the venue, leaving Kiara screaming and sobbing uncontrollably on the floor. The grand ballroom descended into a state of complete chaotic shock. Guests were hastily grabbing their suit coats and expensive designer purses, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive social fallout of the evening. The beautiful, luxurious wedding reception had officially transformed into an active federal crime scene, and nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire. The heavy wooden doors at the main entrance swung open wide. The taller police officer from the loading dock marched back into the ballroom, followed closely by 3 additional fully uniformed officers. They were no longer walking with the cautious, hesitant steps of officers responding to a simple venue theft. They moved with absolute lethal purpose, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. One of Yvonne Yu's corporate lawyers stepped forward, meeting the officers halfway across the polished dance floor. The lawyer unlatched his leather briefcase and handed the lead officer a thick stack of manila folders. Inside were the expedited federal warrants, the DNA lab results, the forged adoption papers, and the undeniable certified proof of decades of financial fraud. The officers reviewed the top sheets quickly, their expressions hardening into masks of pure professional outrage. The lead officer marched directly up to Desmond, who was still pinned near the side exit by the backup units. "Desmond, you are under arrest!" The officer boomed, his voice echoing powerfully over the hysterical sobbing of Patricia and Kiara. He grabbed Desmond Yu's arms and violently twisted them behind his back, snapping the heavy steel handcuffs shut with a loud, sharp metallic click. "But we are not just charging you for the parking lot frame-up, sir. You are officially under arrest for grand larceny, systemic corporate fraud, and the federal kidnapping of a minor." Patricia shrieked at the top of her lungs as 2 other officers approached her at the head table. She tried to scramble backward frantically, kicking her heavy wooden chair away, but the officers grabbed her firmly by the arms, hauling her forcefully to her feet. She kicked and thrashed, screaming that she was a highly respected member of society, screaming that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. They slammed the heavy handcuffs onto her wrists, completely ignoring her pathetic, desperate pleas entirely. The 300 high society guests stood in dead absolute silence. Nobody reached out to help them. Nobody offered to call a defense lawyer. The wealthy people who had happily sipped expensive champagne and complimented Patricia Yu's tailored dress just an hour ago now watched with cold, disgusted judgment. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, perfectly clear path from the head table straight to the main exit. Desmond and Patricia were forcefully marched down the center aisle of the ballroom. It was the ultimate devastating perp walk. They were wearing their highly expensive formal wear, their tailored black tuxedo and designer mother-of-the-bride gown, now completely disgraced by the heavy steel chains securely binding their wrists. They were paraded in shame in front of every single important person they had ever tried to impress in their entire fake lives. The absolute social humiliation was complete and permanent. I stood near the DJ booth watching them disappear out the front glass doors into the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting police cruisers. I felt a massive, suffocating weight completely lift off my chest. The heavy, invisible chains they had wrapped tightly around my neck for 34 years finally snapped and fell away into the darkness. I was completely free. I slowly walked out to the center of the hardwood dance floor. Kiara was still kneeling there entirely alone. The guests had all backed far away from her, leaving her isolated in a wide circle of empty space. She was hyperventilating, her perfect bridal hair ruined, her expensive makeup smeared darkly down her face, her $15,000 lace dress tangled uselessly around her legs. She had absolutely no access to money. Her wealthy husband had just permanently abandoned her. Her parents were currently on their way to a federal holding cell. She had absolutely nothing left in the world. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and bloodshot, filled with a pathetic, desperate pleading. "Aaliyah, please," she choked out a violent sob, holding her trembling hands up toward me. "Please do not leave me like this. I have nowhere to go." I looked down at the cruel, arrogant woman who had intentionally shoved a tray of my hard work onto the kitchen floor that very morning. The woman who had laughed at the thought of me rotting in a prison cell while she spent my stolen money. I looked at her and I felt absolutely no pity whatsoever. I reached behind my back and slowly untied the tight knot of my crisp white catering apron. I pulled the heavy fabric over my head, holding it loosely in my hands. I looked her dead in the eye and dropped the apron directly onto her head. It fluttered down softly, covering her ruined, tear-stained face. "Clean up the mess, Kiara," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of all emotion. "You are the hired help now." I turned around and walked out the front doors of my venue, stepping into the cool, quiet night air to start the rest of my completely reclaimed life. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that wedding venue and left my abusers drowning in the wreckage of their own making. Today, the air I breathe does not smell like fear, obligation, or the damp mildew of a concrete basement. It smells like roasted garlic, fresh thyme, and absolute undeniable freedom. I am standing in the center of a pristine, state-of-the-art commercial kitchen. The stainless steel counters gleam flawlessly under warm, custom-designed lighting. The synchronized rhythm of chopping knives and sizzling pans creates a beautiful, chaotic symphony. This is the heart of my newly opened, wildly successful luxury restaurant, situated right in the center of the city's most exclusive culinary district. Every single piece of equipment, from the imported Italian brick ovens to the custom marble plating stations, was fully funded by my recovered inheritance. For 34 years, I was forced into servitude. I cooked to appease monsters who had stolen my entire existence. But tonight, as I carefully plate a delicate pan-seared sea bass with a vibrant saffron reduction, I cannot help but smile. I do not cook for abusers anymore. I cook purely for joy. I am the executive chef. I am the sole owner. I am Aaliyah Carter. The legal reckoning that followed that disastrous wedding reception was swift, thorough, and absolutely merciless. When Yvonne promised to freeze their assets, she was not making a hollow threat to scare them. Her elite team of corporate attorneys worked alongside federal investigators to dismantle Patricia and Desmond's entire financial foundation in a matter of days. Forensic accountants traced every single stolen dollar from my trust fund. The massive suburban house they had purchased with my money was seized by federal authorities. Their luxury vehicles were towed away in the middle of the night, right in front of their horrified wealthy neighbors. Because they had absolutely no access to the stolen trust fund, they could not afford the high-priced defense lawyers they desperately needed to save themselves. Today, the people who pretended to be my parents are sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial for grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, and the kidnapping of a minor. They are facing decades behind bars. Patricia actually tried to write me several letters from jail begging for my forgiveness and pleading with me to drop the charges in the name of the family we once had. I returned every single envelope unopened, stamped with return to sender. They are exactly where they belong, locked away in a cold, windowless concrete cell, experiencing the exact same isolation they forced upon me for my entire childhood. And then there is Kiara. The golden child's spectacular fall from grace was perhaps the most poetic justice of the entire ordeal. Without Jamal's immense wealth to fall back on, and without my stolen inheritance to fund her lifestyle, she was left completely destitute. She was legally held responsible for the massive financial contracts of her ruined luxury wedding. Because she had no marketable skills and had never worked a real day in her life, she was forced to take the first job that would hire her. She is currently working a grueling minimum wage shift at a greasy 24-hour local diner just to pay off the crushing debt she accumulated. The arrogant woman who once wore a $15,000 lace bridal gown and threw a tantrum over the shade of ivory on a wedding cake is now wearing a stiff polyester uniform. She spends her nights wiping down sticky tables, taking orders from rude customers, and scrubbing dirty floors. She finally learned what it actually means to be the hired help, and she will be paying that price for a very long time. I wipe my hands on a crisp, clean linen towel and walk out of the bustling kitchen into the main dining room. The restaurant is completely booked for the evening, filled with the lively hum of satisfied guests, soft jazz music, and the clinking of fine crystal. But I bypass the main floor and walk directly toward the exclusive private chef's table, tucked away in a cozy, softly lit alcove. Sitting at the table, sharing a bottle of expensive vintage wine, and laughing warmly, are the two people who helped me burn my old life to the ground and build this new one. Yvonne looks up as I approach, her sharp brown eyes softening with a deep, genuine affection. Over the past 6 months, she has become so much more than just my biological aunt. She has become my true family, my closest mentor, and the fiercely protective mother figure I was cruelly denied for so long. She spends hours telling me stories about my real mother, slowly filling in the massive gaps in my history with love and truth. Sitting across from her is Jamal. His annulment from Kiara was finalized with lightning speed, severing his legal ties to that toxic nightmare before the ink on the marriage certificate could even dry. Jamal and I have spent the last few months navigating the bizarre, traumatic fallout of that explosive night, and in the process we have forged a beautiful, unbreakable friendship. He is no longer the deceived, heartbroken groom. He is a frequent guest at my restaurant and a trusted confidant. Tonight, he even brought a set of architectural blueprints to show me, eagerly helping me design the layout for my potential second restaurant location. I set the beautifully plated dishes down on the table, taking a comfortable seat beside Yvonne. We raise our glasses together, the crystal chiming softly in the air. We toast to new beginnings, to reclaimed stolen time, and to the absolute, undeniable strength of a chosen family. I take a sip of the rich red wine, letting the warmth settle deeply into my chest, feeling a profound sense of peace I never thought possible. I look away from the table and turn my attention directly to you. My fake parents spent 34 years telling me I was born to serve. They told me I was nothing more than a convenient maid, a clumsy, unwanted girl destined to stay quietly in the background while they lived in the bright spotlight. They thought their cruelty would keep me small forever. They were right about exactly one thing. I was born to serve. I serve justice, and I serve it incredibly cold. Have you ever had to expose a toxic family to find your true worth? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you in order to protect yourself and reclaim your own life? Let me know your story in the comments below. Hit the like button if you believe that karma never misses an address, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of surviving, fighting back, and thriving. Remember, your bloodline does not dictate your boundaries, and your past does not determine your power. Keep fighting for your peace.